press the button.
Do you dare to follow me down? Head into the unknown. Down the rabbit hole. Where it stops, no one knows. We're going head into the unknown. Na, 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 na.
Let's go on the record in the state of Koberger, or the state versus Koberger. Present in the courtroom today are the defendant with counsel, Miss Taylor and Miss Mathis. Is Mr. Logsden here?
Mr. Logsden is here, Your Honor.
For the state, we have Mr. Thompson, Mr. Nye, and Miss Jennings.
Yes, Your Honor.
We have a number of people in the courtroom. Are they all part of a counsel team or witnesses that are to be called today?
Both, Your Honor.
Outside of those two categories, that's everybody?
Everybody here is a consultant or witness. I'm not quite sure who's on the prosecution side.
Miss Allen is from the Attorney General's office, and Ms. Workman is our victim witness coordinator. Ho, ho, ho.
All right. Before we get going this morning, I understand the first portion of today's hearing will be to put on evidence related to the IGG suppression and the Franks issue. In terms of witnesses, what are we doing in terms of excluding and or exceptions to exclude based on experts?
Your Honor, the parties have stipulated that the witnesses may be inside the courtroom for the entirety of the proceeding. The state has their witness that's a remote witness, and that's fine for the person to listen in.
So that person is appearing remotely?
Yes, Your Honor, that's correct.
Do we have them up?
They are not connected.
They are not connected. Did you give them a link? Did you ask for a link?
Yes, they let us know they received the link, but we're okay getting started, Your Honor. He doesn't need to be here.
I was told by my law clerk that defense intends to refer to exhibits that don't have copies here today for the court.
Your Honor, there was a stipulation that all of the exhibits that were attached to the IGG motion and the Franks motion would be admitted. I'm happy to give the court my copies. That was about 1,000 pages worth of stuff, so I did not print and haul down an extra copy, but I'm happy to give the court my copy if the court wants a hard copy.
I've got a copy in the file. The only problem is trying to find what we're talking about quickly if you're referring to a distinct item within that. Typically, I've provided copies of the specific exhibits witnesses go over. I'll do my best, but...
I'm happy to provide the court my copy or use the Elmo so the court can see the display.
All right. We'll do what we can. In the future, if you know what exhibits you're going to be talking about in particular, you should have 2 copies available for the court.
I will, Your Honor.
Anything to take up before we get started?
No, Your Honor, I don't believe so.
I don't believe so either, thank you.
All right. The defense may call its first witness.
Your Honor, the defense would call Brett Payne.
Just to make sure, we're not live, right, Sandra?
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give now before the court is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. May I approach the podium, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
Good morning.
Good morning, ma'am.
Will you state your full name, please?
Brett Payne.
How is your last name spelled?
Payne.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm the detective corporal at Moscow Police Department currently.
How long have you been at Moscow Police Department?
Almost 7 years now.
Prior to Moscow Police Department, did you have law enforcement experience?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
And what was that?
I was in the Military Police Corps, the U.S. Army, for 3 years prior to coming to Moscow Police Department.
Are you post-certified?
Yes, ma'am.
In the course of your responsibilities with Moscow Police, were you handling an investigation involving homicides at 1122 King Road?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was your role?
I was assigned lead detective after about the first 24 hours in that case.
And does that mean that you have responsibility for the case and evidence?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. As such, did you participate in a search for a suspect?
Yes, ma'am.
And when was the first time you heard Brian Kohberger's name?
The first time I heard Brian Kohberger's name was December 19th, 2022.
And that was a result of?
That was a result of investigative genetic genealogy that was being undertaken by the FBI. We had a phone call that evening and we were told Brian Kohberger's name.
And before that, Mr. Kohberger was not on your radar?
No, ma'am.
Before December 19th, was the FBI cast team member collocated with you?
Yes, ma'am.
How long had he been collocated with you? Fuck?
He does not know what this word means.
Neither
I
do
don't remember exactly, but it had been several weeks at that point.
And that was Nicholas Balance?
Yes, ma'am.
What other FBI team members were you collocated with you?
Goodness, a lot. We had technical assistant Maria Tyndall, Special Agent Jacobson, and numerous other FBI special agents that were there to assist.
By the time it was December 19th and you first heard Brian Kohberger's name, had you reviewed videotapes?
Yes, ma'am.
How many hours of videotapes do you think you reviewed?
I don't remember a lot. I can't give you an accurate representation.
In those videotapes, did you focus in on any particular ones that were of interest to you?
Yes, ma'am. In particular would be are you talking about the addresses that how would you like me to refer to them?
How you nicknamed the cameras?
So the first one was from 1112 King Road. It was a surveillance camera, an exterior surveillance camera on a house that was immediately to the northeast of 1122 King Road. There was some footage from a Linda Lane camera. I forget the address off the top of my bald head. There was footage from the A&W, which is at the corner of Louder and South Main, or Highway 95. There was footage from an address on Indian Hills. There was also footage from a Ridge Road camera. And that's how we referred to them, basically by those names.
With those references in mind and keeping December 19th in mind, which of those cameras were your focus before you learned of Brian Kohberger's name?
I would say all of them were of importance before that.
And it was later that other cameras became important. Is that right?
Those were the main ones we relied upon for vehicles in particular, is what those ones were.
I'm going to return to that in just a minute, but I want to talk to you about interviews. Did you interview any people in relation to the case before December 19th?
Yes, ma'am.
And did other officers interview people?
Yes, ma'am.
Were some of those people the roommates of the people at 1122 King?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you review other officers' work as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you have regular meetings with other officers about the status of the investigation?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you have any role in deciding to pursue investigative genetic genealogy?
Yes, ma'am. It was a collaborative decision amongst the command team to go that route. But yes, I was a part of that.
Were you part of the discussions during the process of the identification?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you aware that Othram Laboratories began the work on the investigative genetic genealogy?
Yes, ma'am.
What kinds of information did you receive from Othram Laboratories?
I don't remember what was received from Othram directly. I knew they were conducting their specific type of work. I don't remember exactly what they provided to us.
Did you receive some documents from them?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you know how many documents you received from them?
I do not.
Was it one time or more than one time?
I don't remember.
Were you part of the discussion to take the work from Othram and go to the FBI?
Yes, ma'am.
Why was that decision made?
From my understanding, granted, this is my first encounter with investigative genetic genealogy. So again, as a collaborative discussion, we decided that because the Idaho State Police Lab and Othram had essentially exhausted their resources, this is how I understood it, that we would move to the FBI because they had more resources available to pursue this particular avenue.
Do you know what more resources the FBI had?
The only thing I'm privy to was that they had more databases that they could compare the sample to. That was the extent of my knowledge.
Do you have familiarity with the databases and the rules that apply to those?
No, ma'am.
I'll save those questions. What was your communications with the FBI about the IgG?
So our communications were just via telephone. The sample was sent to the FBI. I don't remember the date it was given over to them. But after that, there were very few conversations, and if they happened at all, they were just telephonic advising us that the process was still in the works, and they'd let us know when or if they had anything of interest for us.
Do you know what files or documents went to the FBI from Othram?
In relation to IgG,
No, did you receive documents from the FBI?
oh, sorry,
That's
I do
okay.
not remember. In relation to IgG,
Yes.
I believe after the fact, after we received Koberger's name, we did receive documents, but I don't remember what they were.
Do you know how many documents related to IgG you received from the FBI?
No, ma'am. I believe as part of the discovery it was in the thousands of pages, but that's the best of my knowledge.
Thank you for that. All right. So once you have Mr. Koberger identified, what's your understanding of what that meant to have his name?
Just in relation to the overall investigation, is that what you...
Yes. Yes.
So the only thing that was given to us was Brian Koberger's name. That was it. It was conveyed to us by the FBI that it was to be taken as no more than a tip. That was it. Just a tip. So once we received his name, we set about doing basically an independent verification of whether or not he was involved in this crime.
I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit more, but do you know why the FBI connected Brian Koberger to the case?
So December 20th, if memory serves, we had a secondary meeting with the FBI via Teams, if memory serves. And they simply walked us through the family tree, how they did that. Now, I don't remember the details of all of that. It was an in-depth conversation that, to be honest, is above my bald head. But they essentially worked their way through the family tree and arrived at a conclusion that Brian Koberger was a person we should look into as a tip. That's the extent of my knowledge of how they did that.
Just a tip.
How was Brian Koberger the name you received as a tip linked to the case?
He wasn't until after December 19th.
What item of evidence did they link Brian Koberger to?
I'm not sure what you're asking. As far as
Oh.
before December 19th, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
We didn't have one at that point. Oh, that's silly. That's bullshit. But that doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry.
No.
I'm mute.
All right. Why did you become interested in learning the identity of Brian Koberger?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question. We were interested in anyone who would have been involved in this. The DNA from the knife sheath was obviously the obviously the one thing that we had thought was a very strong piece of evidence in the case. So it was that particular piece that we pursued as a potential avenue of identifying a suspect.
Is it your understanding that the FBI's work said that it was Brian Koberger's DNA on the sheath?
That is not my understanding.
So what is your understanding?
My understanding is that the FBI concluded that Brian Koberger was a possible source of DNA that we should look into. They did not, to my knowledge, at any point say that Brian Koberger's DNA is on the knife sheath. That was never conveyed to me.
On December 20th, when that happened, when he's somebody you should look into, what did you do?
We had already started looking into him from the previous evening. So that day, December 20th, we began going through basically our sort of standard investigative procedures that we had been doing throughout the investigation for various leads, to include basic DMV searches, NCIC offline returns, NCIC searches. We have a database called TLO, which is a credit-based search that we use to find basic information. So we started doing all those things, looking for info on Mr. Koberger.
And what you found is that he didn't have a criminal history. Is that right?
That's correct.
Talk to me about going to Pennsylvania for the trash pull.
Well, I was not in Pennsylvania for the trash pull.
I'll ask somebody else that later. All right. So after you received Brian Koberger's name, and he hasn't been on your radar at all before, is that right?
That's correct.
All right. You had pursued interviews and surveillance video. Had you pursued evidence found inside the scene at 1122 King?
Yes, ma'am.
What efforts did you make to pursue unknown male B?
You have to be more specific. I don't remember exactly where unknown male B came from.
If I told you that the lab report showed unknown male B came from a blood spot on the handrail going between the second and the first floor, does that help jog your memory?
Yes, ma'am.
Why did you not pursue this person?
At that point in time, we'd already received Mr. Koberger's name, and from what my understanding was, entering another DNA profile into CODIS would remove the previous one we had from the knife sheath.
The fuck?
Stupidest shit I've ever heard.
What? So if memory serves, the discussion was, we'll hold off. Oh, sorry, T.
No, you're good. I'm just like, that's the stupidest shit I've ever heard.
It is.
Yeah, that doesn't make any fucking sense. So if memory serves, the discussion was, we'll hold off, we'll stay with the one from the knife sheath, and if we need to, we can address the unknown male B at a later time.
I want to make sure I understand your testimony. Were you not aware of unknown male B until after December 19th when you knew Brian Koberger's name?
No, ma'am, I was aware of that before, yes.
How about unknown male D?
Again, you're gonna have to be more specific.
If I told you unknown male D came from a lab report from a sample of blood on some gloves outside the house, does that refresh your memory?
Yes, ma'am, it does.
You're aware of that too?
Yes, ma'am.
I want to back up and talk about the affidavits. I think you told me in a prior hearing that you were the person that wrote Exhibit A, or the affidavit in support of the search warrants, when it came to looking for things about Brian Koberger. Did I understand that right?
Yes, ma'am.
In that affidavit, when you began, was that on or about December 23rd to get records?
I believe it was December 23rd, yes.
Wait, go up one.
Oh, sorry. As far as when I started writing the affidavit, is that what you're referring to?
The first search warrant that applied to Brian Koberger.
I believe it was December 23rd, yeah.
When did you begin writing that affidavit?
I began writing that affidavit long before that. It had been a running affidavit because at the beginning of it, there's the walkthrough of the crime scene, there's numerous things. It was a living document. So we would just add information to it. I'd say that document started, I don't know, I couldn't give you an exact date, a couple weeks prior to that, even before we knew Mr. Koberger's name.
Help me understand what parts were added after you knew Mr. Koberger's name.
Well, to walk down the line best I can. So obviously there's the initial component, which is the crime scene, the testimony from the roommates. Then after that, it shifts to, I believe the first mention of, or the first component was that Brian Koberger was pulled over by Corporal Duke on a traffic stop. He was also contacted by WSU Police. His vehicle was ran by WSU Police Department officers. Then after that, we included, trying to walk down through the thing without it in front of me, Then we included the vehicle information that was about the white Elantra. And after that, we included his residence. And then we had the hit LPRs, or his vehicle had been seen on LPRs between Moscow or Pullman, excuse me, and Pennsylvania. And then there was the component about where he lived in Pennsylvania.
God, he's stupid. That was not the question. Let's go back to that time before you started adding the traffic stop. That affidavit contains some information that you gained from other officers. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you didn't write large parts of that affidavit. Is that also right?
I took a lot of language from experts and other officers and agents. That's correct.
Are you aware your affidavit, your living document, was claimed by other people as their own original document? Not giving you credit, but claimed as their own? Are you aware of that?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you aware that you probably know because Nicholas Balance was collocated with you? Did the two of you continually work on language to satisfy what the prosecutor wanted to see for probable cause?
I'm told that's co-located, but I don't know if that's true. But I still don't know what that means. Yes, ma'am.
Nope, I just Googled it. It says collocate.
Oh,
Well,
look
never
at
mind then.
It's it means
Gross.
collocated.
Collocated. It sounds like a vegetable.
It's the act or result of placing or arranging things together.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, okay.
All right. So did you and Nicholas Balance produce a map to show a possible route of travel for your suspect?
I like that Officer Payne tried to correct you and then he was wrong. I'm sorry. What were you saying? What were you saying? Ask me again.
That fits, I'd say. I said,
Ask me one more time.
did you and Nicholas Balance produce a map to show a possible route of travel for your suspect?
Yes, ma'am.
And, Your Honor, I am at Defendants 1A. I can either put it up here or approach the court with the map. Judge. Your Honor. Did we bore you to death already? We're only on page 22.
Yeah, you see what you're referring to? There's been a lot of Exhibit A's in this case. Just as housekeeping, you had mentioned you stipulated to the admission of sounds like a large chunk of records, like 1,000 pages.
Yes, Your Honor. It's the stack of exhibits that came behind the amended Franks motion from the defense.
Okay, and you want me to search through that to find stuff that you want me to rely on?
I don't. I'm happy to give you my copy.
No, I don't mean that. As you know, I entered an order in this case that I'm not going to scour the record to find things that support your claims in this case. You have to cite them in particularly. And so I get concerned when I'm told I'm going to get a large document to be admitted that doesn't sound like it's going to be the focus of the actual hearing, or much of it.
Well, Your Honor, I do have quite a few more questions for this detective. I'm trying to be mindful of my role here with him as far as Franks and his work in IGG. But when it's time for me to argue Franks, what I planned to do was to argue from the exhibits, identify them for the court, and hand the court my copy. So I don't expect the court to thumb through all the D1, D2s. I just didn't bring another 1,000 pages with me.
Oh, I understand. My concern wasn't so much that I had in front of me as actual paper. My concern is littering the record with things that are not referred to. If you're going to refer to specific documents in there, that's fine, but don't expect me to go looking at things you don't refer to necessarily.
Oh, I absolutely understand that, Your Honor. Those were all put in so that counsel would be advised.
The fact that I admit this group of documents does not mean that it is something that can be relied on, absent you actually using it.
Absolutely, I understand that, Your Honor. I don't expect the court to read my mind. Thank you for that. Detective, I'm going to attempt to put this map up here. Is that the map you and Nicholas Balance came up with to help with probable cause?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm going to leave that there for just a minute, and I'm going to ask you some other questions. I want to back up to the part of the first affidavit. This is asking for AT&T records, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And this AT&T record, is that the first set 48 hours of AT&T records?
Yes, ma'am. I believe so.
And are these AT&T records related to a phone Mr. Koberger had?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And so in doing this affidavit, you have this working document, and I'm going to start with DM. If I say DM, do you know who I'm talking about?
Oh, yes, ma'am, I do.
And she is one of the roommates, is that right?
We're sealed. You can use the name.
I can use the name. Trying to get a habit, and then it's redacted anyway. So, Dylan, who is she?
She was one of the surviving roommates.
And how many times was Dylan interviewed by law enforcement at the time you wrote this December 23rd report?
If memory serves, it was 4, I think. 3 or 4.
In the affidavit, you wrote a statement that she had heard Kaylee go upstairs, yell, quote, "someone's here," end quote, and run back downstairs. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you used the words, quote, "she thought she heard," end quote. Do you remember that? Jennings.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. I'm objecting based on the scope of what this testimony is supposed to be. My understanding was it was limited solely to the issue of Franks and IGG.
I was just about to ask the question. I don't recall the statements of Dylan being a subject of a motion to suppress separate from the Franks issue. Am I correct about that?
That is correct, Your Honor.
Okay, so we're not at a Franks hearing on that issue. So the only issue we are at a Franks hearing on is the IGG.
All right, well, let me rephrase. Let me start from a different place.
I'll sustain the objection.
Let's go to the part of your affidavit for December 23rd, AT&T 1, the part where you put in things particular to Brian Koberger. You put in that affidavit a traffic stop, I believe, from August in Moscow, Idaho. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
That traffic stop, was that on your radar before December 19th when you learned of Brian Koberger's name?
No, ma'am.
Okay. The next thing you relied on was a traffic stop at WSU. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Was that traffic stop on your radar before you knew of Brian Koberger's name on December 19th?
No, ma'am.
You put in information about front license plates being missing from Pennsylvania cars. Is that right?
That sounds correct, yes.
The 1112 video did not show enough of the vehicle that you could see whether it had a front license plate. Is that right?
That sounds correct, yes. Oops. That sounds correct, yes.
So it was after you learned of Brian Koberger's name that became part of your affidavit. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Let's talk about the vehicle identification for a minute before I run back down through the rest of that affidavit after Brian was identified. When you worked with Special Agent ML to identify a vehicle, was there more than one vehicle he identified?
I don't believe there was. If memory serves, it was just the Hyundai Elantra.
Would you agree that he was most comfortable with the years 2011 to 13?
Object, Your Honor. The same reason I don't understand the scope related to IGG.
Your Honor, I'm going to ask for a little leeway on this one. I think it will be clear in about 2 more questions. It is a sealed proceeding. I'll be arguing it at Frank's.
I don't want to pollute the record, so approach.
They looked for 2011 to 13. It was their BOLO. It was after Brian was identified by IGG, they expanded the search.
That relates to what?
It's going to relate to Frank's, but it has to do with IGG and when they identified him. I have about 2 more questions along this line.
You have the separate Franks motion regarding the scope of the car search.
Absolutely.
That we're not here for today. We're here for the IGG. I get the idea that if the IgG is suppressed, the warrants based on IgG is suppressed. That affects a lot of other things, right? But I don't think you need to get into the evidence of that at this point because it's part of the Franks. There's a separate Franks motion on that.
There absolutely is. The next question I'm going to get to in the affidavit after the IgG was the police in Pullman running the car, and he has laid it out in the affidavit after the IgG without stating it. So I'm doing the IgG part with him now. That car is a different year than the one the Bolo is for. That's as far as I'm going with the car at this hearing.
Counsel?
I don't understand what that has to do with the IgG. It's part of a Frank's hearing related to vehicle identification. I understand her timeline, but I think that point has already been made.
This was when I was allowed to explore this witness since he's already here and we've paid for him to come here.
Yeah, but I didn't open up everything to Franks because we couldn't get into all the other things that I understood we could get into the entirety of Franks on IgG, which is why I allowed it. And that's what we're going to stick to today.
IgG flows. It makes everything.
Well, I'm not suggesting we get into other Franks issues that sprung in part from IgG because those are separate based, right? And so I think we need to just talk about the specific IgG stuff today in terms of Franks. There's not a separate motion to suppress based solely on that and not the IgG, if I'm not mistaken, apart from the Franks motions.
To suppress, which I'm not following. I'm sorry.
There are motions to suppress that are not Franks related.
Right. I'm not going there.
That's evidence we can put on today, but I thought we were going to do that later today.
Absolutely.
There are various Franks motions, one of which is to suppress. One of the Franks motions is that there was a Franks violation by not informing the magistrate of the use of the word IgG in violations, as you alleged them in obtaining the IgG. That's the issue we are doing today in terms of evidence, and I want to stick to that. So getting into the car, which is separate, which I understand your argument is the IgG led them to expand the search of the cars, but that's not the Franks issue itself. The Franks issue itself on IgG is the IgG itself, and it's limited to that.
All right.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Woohoo!
All the things in the warrant that become particular to Brian Kohberger were not on your radar before you learned his identity through IgG. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you elected not to put the IgG identification in your probable cause affidavit. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
What led to that decision?
That decision was a collaborative decision. We made that decision in an effort to independently verify the information that was provided to us from a tip from the FBI, in much the same way that we would any other tip in law enforcement. So it was not in any way meant to obfuscate any sort of information. It was simply, can we validate Mr. Kohberger's involvement in this incident, or can we not? That was it.
As a group effort, you decided to intentionally leave that out of your affidavit?
Yes, ma'am.
Given the limitation at this point, I think that's all my questions.
All right.
Good morning, Detective. I only have one question for you. Let's go back to December 19th, December 20th, and the information that was provided to the team. Correct? It was a team.
Yes, ma'am.
And who all was part of this team that was receiving this information telephonically from the FB?
So there were several of us. Yourself, Mr. Thompson was there, Darren Gilbertson from the Idaho State Police, Ed Jacobson from the FBI. I believe there were a couple other folks from the FBI and ISP in the room. I don't remember exactly who they were. And then myself. There was numerous people that were involved.
I said there would only be one question, but there's more. Would it have been essentially the team leaders for the investigation?
Yes.
Was this any different than the other information sharing that occurred during this case?
Not at all.
There were routine team discussions.
Yes, ma'am. We had 2 official briefings every day of the investigation, morning and evening, so twice a day. We would all link up. And that was not just the command team. That was everyone who was not actively on an interview would come back to the police department, sit in the same room, and discuss the information that was learned from that day. So it was very common throughout this investigation for us all to be in the same room and discussing the same information.
So, you were not the only investigator receiving information from various sources. Question mark.
Absolutely not.
So, then we talk about this Exhibit A. That wasn't necessarily just your Exhibit A.
No, ma'am, it was not.
It was all the information that the investigators had up to that point.
Yes, ma'am, that's an accurate statement.
Now, related to the IGG and the information you were provided by the FBI. In the information provided, did you receive any medical information about Brian Koberger?
No, ma'am, we did not.
I don't have anything further. Thank you.
A redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Miss Jennings was just talking to you about the team, I guess, that got together a couple times a day from November 13th until December 19th or 20th is your target time right now.
Yes, ma'am.
Who from the FBI was part of those daily meetings?
Like I said, Special Agent Jacobson was there. Maria Tyndall was there. I believe Special Agent Rob Hill was involved. I'm trying to think of other names. I don't remember any. There were others there. I just don't remember who they were. I apologize.
That's okay. How about who else from Moscow Police Department?
So, Captain Blaker was there. I believe usually Detective Vargas was there. Sometimes Chief Fry would sit in on those meetings. Most nights, Chief Fry would sit in on those meetings. Captain Dallinger, Anthony Dallinger, was in those meetings from MPD. I'm trying to think of all the others. Basically, the whole command team from MPD itself would be in those meetings. And then whoever else was available from the investigation section would also come on in.
Who from ISP was there?
Darren Gilbertson was there. I believe Detective Joe Lake was there most days. I can't remember who else was consistently there. I remember those two for sure. Lieutenant Mike Mooney was in those meetings. That was the 3 off the top of my bald head.
When was the first time you talked about the identification of Brian Koberger in those meetings?
As far as when we knew of him?
Yeah.
December 19th.
How many hours of meetings do you think you'd had up until the identification of Brian Koberger?
Goodness, many. I don't know. It was a lot.
Twice a day, every day?
Yes, ma'am.
7 days a week?
If not more than that, yeah. How many weeks? Sorry.
What weeks does he live in? Thank you, that's it. That's it, I'm done with him. Payne, go away.
Oh shit, I'm muted over here on my court microphone. So, thank you, Detective. You can step down. Defense can call its next witness.
I'm sorry?
You can call your next witness.
Rylene Nowlin.
Hold, please. So, we need an intermission very quickly while we switch out witnesses. Need to figure out who's Nolan. Ange, I don't know if you have to go yet or not.
I don't. I can be Nolan. I can be anything you want me to be.
Nolan.
Oh, baby.
You want a picture of Nolan?
Yeah.
Hold, please.
Okay.
Tell me when we're ready, because I'm on a different screen.
I think you'll be pleased Ashley's gone.
Hmm?
I think you guys will be pleased Ashley's gone.
For the remainder? Surely not.
I think she's gone, yeah.
She doesn't talk very much anymore.
No, that's it. No, she doesn't talk at all.
I think everybody's
wore her out.
is gone.
Yeah, that's it.
Do we like Rylene?
On top of my bald head.
Nah, Ashley's finished for the day. Now I'm Santa and Nai.
Look at his little bald head.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Look at Payne's little tiny bald head.
Payne is a manlet. Oh, Bill was coughing a lot that day.
What?
Bill was coughing a lot that day. CH said. He was.
Oh, sorry. I thought I did this already. My bad. 1 second. Oh my gosh, this is nice. We're just sitting here. Okay, sorry. 1 second.
We're just chilling, waiting for the next witness to come in the courtroom. She takes a long time to get there.
I don't know why.
Right.
That just made me think of oh, mommy.
Got her little walker. She's coming.
Rylene.
Okay. Hey.
All right, you're going to be sworn in now.
Ready?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give now before the court is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Will you please state your name for the record?
Rylene, Rylene Nowlin, Nowlin.
I think you've done this before.
A few times.
How are you employed?
I'm employed as a forensic laboratory manager with the Idaho State Police Forensic Services Laboratory in Meridian, Idaho.
How long have you worked for Idaho State Police Forensics Laboratory?
I have worked for Idaho State Police Forensics Services since November 2002.
Did you have prior experience similar?
Prior to my employment with ISP, I did not.
How were you trained for your job?
I have formal education. I was originally hired as a forensic scientist in the biology and DNA unit. As such, I was required to have a degree in biology, biochemistry, or similar. I was required to have coursework in genetics, molecular biology, biochemistry, and statistics. And then I completed the Idaho State Police Forensic Services specialized training program in biology screening, as well as in DNA analysis, as well as in DNA database analysis. And then I've completed hundreds of hours of continuing education over my years.
Are you a member of any professional organizations?
Yes, ma'am.
Which ones?
I am a member of the Northwest Association of Forensic Scientists, the American Association of Forensic Scientists, and the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors.
Are you part of a collaborative?
Yes, I am a member of the National Technology and Validation Implementation Collaborative.
What is that one about?
That is a group comprised. That is a
Probably
group
compromised,
comprised. Probably. That is a group comprised of laboratory management. Typically, it depends on which portion or subsection of the collaborative that have gathered together to generate ideas for best practices and guidelines for new technologies coming into forensics.
Would investigative genetic genealogy be a new technology coming into forensics?
That is one of the technologies. However, our group refers to it as FIG, Forensic Investigative Genetic Genealogy.
FIG. Okay, I'll try to remember that. That's the one I want to talk about today. So your group is talking about best practices for FIG. Is that right?
That's one of our areas of focus, correct?
Are you doing that because there are practices that are important in that discipline?
We are doing that because it's a new technology coming into the forensics world, and not every laboratory manager has a background in DNA. We also have a group on firearms because not every laboratory manager has a background on firearms. And it's just a resource for those managers as they're looking to implement new technologies.
You mentioned best practices. Does that have anything to do with things that I might refer to as standards or procedures or protocols?
No.
What does best practices mean?
Best practice is a recommendation based on the current knowledge in the field. There are organizations that come up with standards for different fields, but this group, that is not their purpose.
In your lab, do you have standards and procedures and protocols?
Our laboratory does have, we'll call them analytical methods, as well as our quality system.
Analytical methods and quality systems means the same thing as procedures and protocols?
Yes.
What does that mean to you?
What that means to me, our laboratory is an accredited laboratory, so we have a set of accreditation standards that we must meet. In order to do that, we have set quality policies as well as the analytical methods for each discipline. That ensures that we're consistently performing our scientific analyses in a way that has been validated and shown to be proper for the testing that's being conducted. And it also shows that we're meeting the national standards by which we are accredited. In addition, DNA has additional standards that they must meet called the FBI's Quality Assurance Standards for forensic casework laboratories, as well as for forensic databasing laboratories.
I want to start with the first part of it. You mentioned, I think, that there's standards and protocols, my definition of them, that helps assure your work so that somebody could look and see what you did and maybe get the same result or understand what you did. Do I understand that right?
Yes, it's the methods we follow, and yes, that would be one application. Someone could look and see what we did.
Now, you mentioned at the very end of what you told me before, DNA has something separate.
Correct.
What do you mean?
Because our laboratory is a participant in the National DNA Index System, it's commonly referred to as CODIS, which stands for Combined DNA Index System. We are subject to additional standards set forth by the FBI because they manage that database.
And what are those standards?
Those standards are known as the QAS standards. They cover everything from when I listed the classes that I had at the beginning, they decide what classes a DNA analyst coming in should have, what education a DNA technical leader should have, what things need to be included in a validation study, how facilities need to be controlled. It covers the gamut of testing.
Validation study, what does that mean?
Whenever a new chemistry, a new instrument, a new procedure is coming online in the laboratory, we perform a study to ensure that that chemistry instrument or procedure is working or receiving the expected results.
Okay. And to be sure, you have to do that because you use CODIS.
Our DNA section has to do that because we use CODIS. The rest of the laboratory because it's part of our accreditation standards.
Tell me what CODIS is, briefly.
CODIS, Combined DNA Index System. It's essentially a national DNA database. It exists on 3 levels. There's a local level, your county sheriff's office, local police departments. There's a state level, which is typically the state laboratory. It is limited to public laboratories. And then the national level. In Idaho, the Idaho State Police Forensic Services Lab in Meridian is the only DNA lab in the state. So there are no local labs in the state of Idaho. And the database contains different indexes. Indexes?
Indices?
Indices. Different indices. There's a forensic index. Those are profiles obtained from items of evidence. There's an offender index. Those are samples from those convicted of qualifying offenses in your state as determined by your state legislator. If your state legislator allows arrestees, there's an arrestee index. And there's also a missing persons index and for remains.
Do you have any special role with the CODIS database?
Currently, I'm a CODIS user. That's my only role at the moment.
What was your role in the fall, November of 2022?
CODIS user.
Do you have any administrative responsibilities with CODIS?
Not currently.
Have you in the past?
In the past, I have served as the alternate state administrator for Idaho.
For CODIS, DNA that goes into CODIS, what kind of profile is used?
If I'm understanding the question correctly, there's different types of DNA profiles, and what goes into CODIS is known as an STR profile, or short tandem repeat.
What kind of information is in a short tandem repeat, or STR?
Can I give a brief explanation about DNA?
Sure.
So, DNA is a substance that's found in the cells of our body. It acts as a blueprint. It tells our bodies what form to take and how to function. Between individuals, it's over 99% the same, and that's why we all have the same basic structure, and our bodies function in basically the same way. In forensics and in STRs, we are targeting that less than 1% that is unique to an individual, with the exception of identical twins. And so areas of DNA that vary widely between individuals don't code for anything typically, so it doesn't tell us anything about a person. When I look at an STR profile, I can tell you if that person is genetically male or genetically female, and that is all.
Do you know what a SNP profile is?
I do.
What is that?
Oh shit, I was muted. I'm so sorry. A SNP profile is a single nucleotide polymorphism. So you're looking at a single nucleotide, whereas the STR is a series of repeating nucleotides, a specific repeat that we're looking for.
The SNP, then, is that a closer look at a person's genome?
I would like to state that I'm not an expert in SNPs. I'm not qualified in the SNP technology and have not ever been qualified in the SNP technology. With STRs, depending on the chemistry, you're looking at anywhere from 13 to 25 plus locations. With SNPs, my understanding is in general, you're looking at a minimum of 10,000.
Does that mean there's more information about a human contained in a SNP than there is an STR profile?
Your Honor, I'm going to object at this point. This witness is not disclosed as an expert, and she just testified she's not an expert in SNP technology.
I appreciate that with respect to her answer, and I will take that into account in the event the defense intends to rely on that testimony. I took it as a sort of background about her general knowledge. I'll allow it for now. I'm not taking it as an expert testimony about that SNP, beyond the basic understanding of what SNP is.
Thank you. Do you remember my question?
Yes. I would assume if you're looking at a larger part of the human genome, that you would be getting a larger amount of information about someone.
I have one more question about CODIS, and then I want to move in a different area. You mentioned that there's 4 indexes, and you talked about a forensic index.
Correct.
What is that one used for?
The forensic index is where profiles generated from items of evidence can be uploaded. There are rules about what can be uploaded, though. It cannot match someone known to be the victim of a crime. It cannot match someone whose DNA should be in a place outside of a crime being committed. It cannot be anything taken directly from a suspect of a crime where you would reasonably assume. It cannot be anything taken directly from a suspect of a crime where you would reasonably assume their DNA would be present. It must be related to a crime, and it must be believed to be from the putative perpetrator of that crime.
So if I understand it, you use DNA, get an STR, and only under certain circumstances can you use CODIS. Do I understand that right?
Correct.
Okay. Outside of CODIS, and I understand what that does. If you create a profile, a DNA profile of somebody, is that a separate thing you do in your lab, even if you're not going to run them through CODIS?
Yes. When we receive items of evidence or samples from known individuals, we generate a DNA profile from those.
Did you become involved in the homicide in Moscow from 2022?
Involved as the manager of the laboratory in Meridian, I haven't actually done any work on any evidence in the case or issued any reports.
All right. Is it fair to say you did not go to that residence then?
Correct.
As the lab manager, do you understand about what evidence has come into the lab from that case?
There was a lot of evidence submitted. I have a general knowledge of items that may have come in, but I could not provide you a detailed list off the top of my blonde head.
That's okay. I won't ask you to.
Oh, thank you.
As a lab manager, are you aware of different bits of testing that were done related to this case?
In general, yes.
Are you aware of a profile called Unknown Male A?
Yes.
Where did that come from?
To my recollection, unknown male A came from a swab taken from a knife sheath that was submitted to the Moscow Police Department.
Are you aware of Unknown Male B?
I believe that was another sample from hearing the previous testimony that was from in the house.
I would only want you to testify from your own base of knowledge.
Like, duh. From my own memory, I don't recall exactly where B was from.
Fair enough. Thank you for clarifying that for me. Are you aware that investigative genetic genealogy or forensic investigative genetic genealogy was used in this case?
Yes.
What was your role in that?
My role specific to this case was facilitating the signing of a memorandum of understanding, making sure that all parties received it and had signed it, those parties being the police agency, the prosecuting attorney's office, as well as a member of ISP's management team. And then, when the preliminary report was received, my job was to look over it, ensure that it had all the required pieces in the report, and then to authorize payment of the invoice for that testing.
What role did you have with the laboratory that was going to perform the FIG work?
As far as how we came to be in contact with them, so when ISP decided to pursue a contract with a laboratory that could perform the SNP testing that we talked about earlier, we're a state agency, so we don't just get to call up anybody and hire them. So we had to go through a bid process. Part of my role was developing the scope of work for that invitation to bid, as in what we expected the vendor to perform. And then when the bids came in, I was involved in the team that evaluated the documents that were submitted. And then ultimately, the Division of Purchasing determined who won the bid.
Did Idaho State Police Forensics have a contract with this laboratory, Othram?
They were the winning bid through that process. And so they were under contract with the Department of Purchasing. Correct.
Is the contract with the Department of Purchasing that you perform these services and we pay you for them, essentially? Or does it have more meat to it to talk about some of the things that you were talking about? How you help develop, I guess, the job description and what would be required?
I am really not familiar with Department of Purchasing's day-to-day operations or how they operate. My role was strictly developing that scope of work. We expect them to develop the profiles that can be uploaded to the public genealogy databases. We expect them to provide us a written report. We expect the report to contain certain things, to have a header, to have a date, to list the case number, have page numbers, those kind of things.
Outside that description of the scope of work and the requirements, did your lab have a separate contract with Othram that basically said you agreed to do these things?
We had that they won the bid from Division of Purchasing, and that's the state contract for performing that work.
You mentioned a memorandum of understanding you helped facilitate to be signed by the parties. Was Othram one of the parties that signed that?
No. This is a memorandum between the law enforcement agencies, the prosecuting attorney's office, and the laboratory.
And in that memorandum of understanding, that indicated that the interim Department of Justice, the Department of Justice interim policy applied. Is that right?
I believe it did. I don't have the exact text memorized.
If I showed you a copy of that memorandum of understanding, would that help you remember if that was part of it?
Yes.
Your Honor, if I have just a moment to gather that, it's not being offered as an exhibit. Teresa.
Just refreshing.
It's to aid in her memory.
Show it to State's Counsel.
Does looking at that refresh your memory as to whether the Department of Justice interim policy applied?
It does say in the first paragraph that it did apply.
And, Your Honor, I'm going to refer to Defense Exhibit D19 here and ask the witness be shown that, and then I'll provide the court my copy.
When was that filed?
That would have been filed with the amended Franks memorandum on the bottom of that page. I'm sorry.
I've got thousands of filings. I have to go by date to find things.
I think it was November 18th or 20th. At the bottom of that page, however, you can see some numbers in red, and those were numbered to make it easier to find.
I just need to find it in the computer first, all right? I found it in my printed documents.
Is that the Department of Justice interim policy?
Yes. The Department of Justice interim policy on forensic, genetic, genealogical DNA analysis and searching.
And in Section 7, I believe it's Section 7 or page 7.
Investigative caution, that section.
Let me ask you the question. Are you familiar
Oh, sorry.
with the provision in that policy that says if there's a prosecution case, if somebody is arrested and there's a prosecution case, all items in the forensic investigative genetic genealogy should be preserved for court purposes?
I believe that's part of it. I don't think it's in Section 7. It might be, but I don't believe that's part of preserving.
Okay, what I want to know is, what did Othram preserve?
I don't know.
What did you get back?
We got back a preliminary report. In other cases, we'll sometimes get back the DNA extract that was sent to them. I don't recall if we got that back in this case. Anything our laboratory receives, we return to the submitting agency.
Would validation be part of that? Validation studies?
I wouldn't assume so. I wouldn't assume that that would be part of this. No.
Would bench notes be important?
Son of a bitch. I'm sorry I didn't unmute. I'm sorry I didn't hear that. What notes?
Bench notes. Lab bench notes?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
For our laboratory, we designate those as part of our case record. I'm not familiar with what Othram designates as part of their case record.
So I guess then that means you don't have any of those.
No, only the preliminary report.
All right, I will move to a different area of questioning, and it's about the requirements with Othram. You mentioned the goal was to create profiles and create a report, but to search public databases.
Correct. There are public genealogy databases that will allow entry of law enforcement samples, and that is part of the scope of work. They were required to enter into those databases.
And are you aware there are databases that do not allow law enforcement to search?
Yes.
Were you part of work after Othram began their work to try and do an investigation?
I was not. As far as, I guess I'm unclear. We received evidence submitted to the laboratory before, during, and after for all sections. Is that what you're referring to?
Let me rephrase my question. I think that question was too broad. While Othram was doing their work, were you part of any work to help Othram? For instance, did you get any documents that you did some research on to try to help Othram?
No.
Were you aware that Othram was just stopped from doing any further work at some point?
I was aware of that.
And this was before they produced any result?
No. We received a preliminary report. I recall receiving that because that's how I know that I can approve payment of the invoice. So I know we received that prior to them being told that they were stopped.
Were you part of the decision to stop them?
I was not.
How did you find out about it?
I found out about it in an email from my laboratory system director.
Do you remember when that happened?
I don't recall.
Does the forensics lab continue to contract with Othram?
Yes.
If Othram had a file that would have had validation studies and bench notes, anything they did on the case, who would have received that?
Again, validation studies would be odd to associate with individual cases, so I wouldn't assume that they would do that. Again, I'm not familiar with their procedures, and as far as who would receive documents, usually it would be, I would assume, the agency which we received that preliminary report.
You mentioned you're not familiar with their procedures.
Not in detail, no.
What procedures are you familiar with?
For Othram,
Yes.
as part of the bid process, all of the bidders were required to submit, I believe they were required to submit their procedures, and it was essentially just looking over them to say, yes, they have a procedure in place for extracting DNA. Yes, they have a procedure in place for doing SNPs. So yes, they meet the minimums for the invitation to bid. But again, I'm not qualified in that technology, so I wouldn't have studied them or rendered an opinion on them.
I won't ask you for your opinion on them. I won't ask you to quote them to me, but you saw those?
Yes, at the very beginning of the bid process.
Let's switch gears. In the case we are here for today, do you recall there being a trash pull? I'm sorry, there being a what? A trash pull.
I recall receiving evidence from a trash pull. Correct.
What role did you have in deciding anything about that trash pull?
Nothing about the trash pull occurring. I do recall there being a brief. I can't remember if it was a phone or a video meeting, and just being asked in general what items from someone's trash are good for DNA.
Did you give advice?
I don't know if it was me specifically or another member of our DNA unit, but we did offer suggestions on items that are good for DNA.
Condoms. Did you receive items to test?
Yes.
What instructions were you given about those items?
The discussion was a person of interest had been developed, and to analyze the items from the trash to determine if they could be inclusive of the DNA profile that was developed from the knife sheath, unknown male A.
What date was that you received the trash?
The trash was received into the laboratory on December 28th of 2022.
So you were looking for a male profile.
Correct.
All right. Did you find male profiles?
I didn't perform the actual testing, but yes, there were male profiles developed.
How many?
I don't know.
Do you know anything about either male profile or any of them?
I believe one of the male profiles designated as E was determined they could be a biological parent or child of the profile from the knife sheath.
And are you aware that Brian Koberger's DNA was in the trash?
I was not aware.
Did you become aware?
I became aware later. We didn't have his name at the time.
You didn't know his name on December 28th?
No, I did not.
Okay. Were you, on December 28th, were you aware that not male E, but another male profile had been identified?
From
The trash.
The trash pull. I knew there were some mixtures of DNA that were also included.
One of the mixtures, did it have a male DNA profile?
I believe it did.
And wasn't that profile the major component of that profile with a minor female?
I believe that sounds correct.
And later, didn't that return to Brian Koberger?
We actually did not perform that comparison.
Did you and I have a discussion a few days ago?
Yeah, we did.
Did you tell me that you knew that to be Brian Koberger's DNA?
Okay, I said I thought that was, and I couldn't find the report where we had done that comparison. I've since looked through, and we did not make that comparison, so I can't say that he was included in that mixture. Our laboratory did not do that comparison.
But a DNA profile was made for that mixture, is that right?
Yes,
And there's a minor female and a major male.
that is my understanding.
And you could, by eye, look at that and tell that's Brian Koberger, couldn't you, if you wanted to?
If I wanted to, I could probably look. I did not.
Okay, you could still do it today if you wanted to.
If there was a request to do the comparison, again, we don't do a visual comparison evidence to evidence. Our procedures don't allow us to do that for probative comparisons.
I need you to help me understand that a little bit. I'm having that question because I understand there was an unknown male B found on lab item 30. Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, well, I also understand that there was a cigarette butt taken from somebody in connection with the case investigation. Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with that.
And that was compared to the DNA on the knife sheath, is that right?
Yeah.
And that was found to be excludable. Am I using that word right?
So you compared something that was taken from somebody to an item of evidence. Oh, wait, sorry. I was Anne. It was an exclusion, correct.
So you compared something that was taken from somebody to an item of evidence, is that right?
It was an exclusion, correct.
What the hell?
Oh, wait, something that...
Yes, that's you. Something
Oh, sorry.
that was...
Okay, my bad. Something that was a secondary reference, as in someone identified it and they saw that person using that item. They saw that what? They hold on. Something that was a secondary reference, as in someone identified it as they saw that person using that item and they saw that person dispose of that item. That item was collected and used as a reference sample from that person because there was someone who said that it was from that person.
Okay, when you got the trash to go through in the lab, you knew that you were looking for a male, right?
Correct.
And you knew that the male and his family members lived in a house that produced that bag of trash. Is that right?
Yes, but not who produced each individual item in that trash pull.
Okay.
It wasn't labeled this water bottle is from person of interest, this tissue is from sibling, this Q-tip is from a parent. We didn't have that information. It was just, here's some items from a trash pull.
And one of those items you took and developed male E.
I did not, but yes, the laboratory did.
In general, the lab developed male E.
Correct.
And compared male A and male E.
Oh, oops, sorry. There was a paternity statistic calculated because they were both single source profiles, meaning only from one individual.
Okay, and there's another male profile.
That was part of a mixture, to my knowledge, meaning more than one person's DNA was present on that item.
Again, only one male, though. Is that right?
So when there's a mixture on an item of evidence, I don't know if you want me to explain the process. The first step is determining the number of contributors to that mixture. Then our laboratory utilizes a software program to help break out the components of that mixture. When one individual is male, it's not always possible to say the gender of the second person. Males have an X and a Y chromosome. Females only have an X. So if there's an X and Y present, it could be one male, it could be two males, it could be a male and a female. Without comparing to known reference samples, I can't say that. And I haven't seen the profile, to my knowledge.
Okay, did you tell me, though, on that sample And I'm talking about 95.9.1. That was a male and a female.
I believe that, I don't know if it was designated as that in the laboratory report. To my knowledge, it was. I can't remember what the report said. Again, I didn't generate the report and I didn't do the work, so I'm not familiar with it as if it was my own work.
Okay. Male B was also a mixture, wasn't it?
I don't know.
Okay.
If it was designated as unknown male B, again, I don't know if it was from a mixed sample or not.
Your Honor, if I may have just a moment. Thank you for that. Just a couple other questions for you. As it relates to male E, it was compared to the sheath. Is that right?
Yeah.
Correct. A paternity comparison.
Male E profile was compared to a lot of other evidence items in this case, wasn't it?
Correct.
And you're allowed to do a manual interpretation per your policy, right?
If there is, so it's not black and white. If it is a single source and we can look at it and say that person's excluded, they are not the source of the DNA, then yes, that can be done manual. And by manual, I mean a person looking at it. If it's a probative comparison, and how we define a probative comparison is if it's saying something about who could be the source of the DNA on an item of evidence that's relevant to the case, then no, we do not do a manual comparison and issue a statement about that, because all of our standards, we have to issue a statistic so that the trier of fact has something to gauge how unique that could be. What is the likelihood that that DNA could be from someone else? We provide that statistic. We don't just say that it matches. That requires a statistical calculation, which we use a probabilistic genotyping software to do.
I apologize. I think I got lost in there. Are you telling me because it was a mix, you couldn't have done a manual interpretation on 95.9.1?
Because it's a mixed profile, and because if it was, you're saying it was Brian's DNA, Brian Koberger's DNA present, that would be a probative comparison in the case, which we have to provide a statistic in order to make that statement. In order to deconvolute a mixture, we are no longer allowed to do those manually. Deconvolute, as in separate the mixture into its components. We have a software. That software was not designed for, nor was it validated for, doing evidence-to-evidence comparisons.
Now you're speaking my language. Validations are important for integrity. Is that right?
In forensics, our laboratory uses validations to ensure any new tool is working properly.
Now, at some point later, your lab issued a report saying matching the DNA on the sheath with DNA taken from Brian Koberger. Is that right?
That's correct. And a statistic was provided.
Now, I want to talk about what we're talking about when we say the sheath. You're familiar with what happened with the sheath for swabbing. Is that right?
I've seen the sheath, and I know our laboratory performs swabbing of evidence, but I did not swab that item of evidence, nor did I see it being swabbed.
As I understand it, though, you've read the lab notes.
At one point, I believe I did read the notes. I think I was asked a question, and the analyst was out of town or something.
And I think you answered that question to law enforcement after consulting somebody else who was with the swabber when the sheath was swabbed. Is that right?
It's sounding familiar.
If I understand the lab reports, it's a single source on the knife sheath. Is that correct? Is that right?
Correct.
Does that mean it's only one person in that area?
Yes, that was detected through our testing.
Tell me where you think that sheath was swabbed for purposes of DNA collection.
I believe the analyst swabbed there's kind of a snap or a button that was at the top of the snap, and that's the area that was swabbed. There were other areas on it sampled as well.
For the purposes of unknown male A that you're telling us later came back to Brian Koberger, that's the only place I want to talk about right now. Are we on the top of the button, the outside, or the inside? The socket portion of the button?
I know on the top. I don't recall if she swabbed the underside or not. I'd have to look at her notes again.
Do you know if that sheath was part of that preserved for fingerprinting?
The swabbing was done first. That's our laboratory standard order of processing. If DNA is needed in fingerprints, they will work together. Essentially, fingerprints will say we can see some possible ridge detail. So if you can avoid this area after DNA says we want to swab this, and they come to a conclusion of what would best suit that item of evidence to determine where to swab, so the swabbing takes place first.
I think I don't have any other questions right now. Thank you.
Mr. Nye, how long do you think you have? I'm just trying to gauge a break here.
About 10 minutes, mate. Oh, sorry. I say about 10 minutes.
All right, well, then let's take 10 minutes and we'll be back. How about that?
Okay.
Just keep going.
Yep.
All right. Keep your seats. Keep your seats. Mr. Nye, I believe you were going to come back on cross at the break. You may inquire, sir.
Good morning. Back to being an American now. Good morning. I just had a few questions for you today. So you talked a little bit about policies and procedures in the lab. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
And you talked about that there are policies and procedures related specifically to DNA. Is that correct?
Correct.
As part of those policies and procedures, does the lab need to have a legitimate reason to test DNA?
Yes. We only test DNA related to criminal investigations or to death investigations. And it needs to be an item that will answer a probative question in a case.
So, for example, if someone at the lab wanted to test DNA out of curiosity about medical information, that would not be consistent with that policy.
We don't do curiosity testing, and none of our testing would provide medical information.
No. You also testified that you were involved in, or maybe primarily responsible for developing the scope of work request for Othram. Is that correct?
I was part of that, yes.
And what is a scope of work request?
That just goes with, and this was my first one I've done, so I don't have vast experience in the process, but we were going to contract with a vendor, just going through and outlining what we expect them to do as part of that.
And what do you recall about this request specifically? What were you requesting Othram to do?
Specifically, we were requesting them, if necessary, to perform DNA extraction, pulling the DNA out of cells on an item of evidence, if necessary. Our laboratory typically did that. We were requesting them to generate a SNP profile using either SNP array or whole genome sequencing. We were requesting them to then upload all of that to public databases that allow law enforcement samples. We were requesting them to generate a report. We were requesting them to notify us or to complete the lab portion of the work, generation of the profile within 60 days, I believe. I believe there was also information in there about not publicly giving our case information to the public without our express permission, things of that nature.
No. Was there anything in the scope of work request related to medical information?
No.
So, you weren't asking Othram to determine if this DNA, the person whose DNA this was, had, for example, cancer?
No.
Now, in your position, and in this case, you testified you didn't actually do any of the testing, but you've read a lot of the reports that were involved. Is that correct?
I've seen a lot of the reports, correct?
And all of the reports you've read, of all of the reports you've read, have you seen that kind of information?
No. The testing our laboratory does not generate any medical information.
And you also talked about, in the scope of work, Othram was required to provide you with at least one report.
At least one report, correct.
And did you have a chance to review that?
I have seen that report, yes.
Did it contain medical information?
No, it did not.
Now, you also talked a little bit with Ms. Taylor about an MOU. Do you remember that discussion?
No.
Yes.
I just want to be clear.
I
Who were the...
Memorandum of understanding.
Okay.
Not a
Fancy.
moo. Not a moo. I
A
just
moo.
want to be clear. Who were the parties to that MOU?
No.
The parts to that MOU specific to this case were the Moscow Police Department, the Leyte County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, and Idaho State Police Forensic Services.
So, Othram was not a party to that MOU?
Correct.
No.
And the FBI was not a party to that MOU?
No.
Correct.
In another part of your testimony, you spoke with Ms. Taylor about the trash pull. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
And that one of the samples that was pulled from the trash that was a mixed sample, your lab did not compare that. Is that correct?
Correct.
And can you explain why you did not compare that?
So initially, we did not compare that because it was a mixed profile. We did not know the source of the profile, so it could not be considered a secondary. Oh, wait. Okay, we did not know the source of that profile, so it could not be considered a secondary reference. So we deemed that to be an evidentiary sample. And we can't make a manual comparison of evidence to evidence, especially when there's a mixture. And if the analyst, again, I was not the analyst. If the analyst did the comparison and determined that unknown male A could have been in the mixture, it would have been inappropriate to compare those two samples together per our analytical methods.
Right. And so, the decision not to compare that, who made that decision?
That would have been the analyst that worked the case.
So, you weren't, to your knowledge. No one at the lab was advised, for example, by the lead investigator on this case, which of those items to test.
No.
You also gave testimony about the knife sheath and the swabs on the knife sheath. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And I know you don't recall exactly where the knife sheath was swabbed, but we've been talking about policies. Do your policies or best practices suggest where a knife sheath or an item like that could be swabbed for DNA?
No. It would be impossible for our analytical methods to cover how to swab or where to swab every single item of evidence. We receive quite a wide variety of items into the laboratory. So it's the analyst's job as a scientist and as a practitioner in forensic biology screening and DNA analysis to know what they're targeting. Oh, so on this item, I believe there was also blood. They would have been targeting that separate and then also trying to determine who may have handled that. So they would have specifically honed
Where
in
the
on an
fuck are
area.
we?
1, 2,
page are
3
we
from
on?
the bottom, 76.
Okay, go. Sorry.
Okay. So on this item, I believe there was also blood. So they would have been targeting that separate and then also trying to determine who may have handled that. So they would have specifically honed in on an area that whoever handled it would have had to have touched and maybe touched repeatedly. Yeah.
Ooh. And why do they hone in on those areas in particular?
Because that's the question we're trying to answer. In forensic DNA analysis, the questions we're trying to answer is, can we link assailant to victim, victim to assailant, or one or both to the scene? So in this instance, my understanding, the sheath was found at the scene. So trying to link the possible perpetrator to the scene.
And why in particular do you hone in on the areas where this person may have handled the knife sheath?
Because looking for So DNA is found in the cells of our body, and that includes the skin cells that are sloughed off on our hands when items are handled. So looking for any touch DNA is the term that is most often used, or from someone touching or handling an item.
We'll just ignore the fact you said touch DNA. So, if I understand you correctly, the analyst is swabbing the places that would most likely have that DNA.
What?
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 That I just didn't want to say that very loudly. Touched DNA.
Correct.
That stuff.
Touch.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
DNA.
Correct.
No further questions. Total.
Ms. Taylor, redirect.
Thank you. Your Honor, I would like to start by sharing a computer screen that I have approved with the prosecutor for refreshing her memory.
It's just for refreshing. It's not an exhibit.
Yeah, it is. May I approach?
Go ahead. Have we established she doesn't remember, or are you just going to stipulate to it?
Jesus Christ.
Your Honor, I can ask the question.
We can save time if you're going to stipulate to it.
Oh,
Yeah,
my God.
that's totally fine, Your Honor.
Let's do that. Are you gonna
God.
share the screen with the court, or just her?
It's just to refresh her memory, Your Honor.
Gotcha. Proceed.
We were talking at the end of my questions and where Mr. Nye just left off with you about where the sheath would have been swabbed. Oh my God, every time I say that now, I'm going to hear her voice. Reading the email that's been placed in front of you, does that refresh your recollection about what you believed to be the place the sheath was swabbed?
Very much so.
Where was it swabbed?
The knife was swabbed the entire. Can I?
Did you say the knife was swabbed?
Sorry. The knife sheath. Am I allowed to read it?
You're supposed to read it and let it refresh your recollection. And then not read it, but just tell me a summary of where it was.
Oh, God.
The entire leather portion of the strap, both top and bottom, and then the underside of the button. I misspoke. She did not swab the top of the button because that was determined to be the most likely place for fingerprints to be found.
The underside of the button, was it the part that the sticky outy part would go into, or the sticky outy part?
Oh,
both?
what?
Yes. Ma'am,
What
do you
happened
understand
there?
the question?
I don't.
The sticky outy part.
Is she mean the blade? Oh, wait, no. She's talking about the
Wait,
button,
okay.
right?
So the underside of the button, was it the part that the sticky out part would go
I
into?
see what she means. Okay. She's talking about like part, like male, female, like plugs. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I know
Come
what
up
you
with the
mean.
proper terms.
Oh,
before
baby.
this hearing?
No wonder this was in the closed part.
question, ma'am.
Or both. Sticky outy part or both.
I can't tell from this. I would have to look at her notes. And DB just said she's also showing them a picture, by the way.
Okay, good enough. Thank you. A couple of follow-up questions for you. You answered a lot of questions for Mr. Nye about medical information and that your lab does not do testing for medical information. Is that because you don't know how? You do STR or why STR testing, not SNP testing?
You're
Hello?
muted.
You're muted.
Damn it.
Trying to figure out if it's the sticky out part. Still. Circulation. Let me look at this. Is it sticky outy or is it sticky inny?
Or both.
Or both.
Correct. Right? Correct? Is
Yes.
that where I am? Okay. Our laboratory performs both STR and YSTRs, and those don't yield medical information.
The MOU that you reviewed
Oh.
and remembered The Department of Justice interim policy applied to the circumstances in this case. Do you know who else the interim policy applies to?
Based on what's stated in the interim policy, it applies to public laboratories like ours that receive federal funding and cases where federal funding is being used.
In Mr. Koberger's case, there was federal funding being used.
To my knowledge, I don't know if we did use federal funding in this case.
Do you recall talking to me a couple days ago?
I love when she asks.
That's like the fifth time she's asked her. Do you recall talking to me a couple days ago?
Yeah.
And do you recall telling me that you did?
I do recall telling you that we had a grant in place, but again, I authorized payment of the invoice. But which funds the funds come out of, I don't know. And I apologize if I misspoke.
And are you aware that the FBI FIG unit, I guess, took over and the FBI finished the genetic genealogy after Othram was stopped?
I'm aware that we were authorized to turn it over, but as to what actually happened after that, I don't know.
Okay, one more question for you. You talked to Mr. Nye a bit about not comparing the sample 95.9.1 to the sheath DNA. And I had asked you a little bit about your policy that allowed you to do the hand search, the manual search on that. Your policy does allow you to do a comparison, like it's either excluded or not excluded, though. Is that right? Am I looking at, and I'm looking at policy 4.5.6.
No. We can report an exclusion. They're not from the same source. But in order to say that they're from the same source, considering that they're from completely different areas, no. We would have to provide a statistic, and we can't do that.
But you could have looked at it and said it's not excluded.
That would be an indication that it's possible. And we would have to provide a statistic for that. And we have, so our biology section, you may be looking at our analytical methods. Biology section has their own quality manual that further discusses this.
Your Honor, if I can have her shown this document to see if we can refresh her memory.
Well, for the record, identify what you're showing.
What I'm showing her are a couple pages out of the biology manual for the Idaho State Police Forensics Lab that is available online. So, Miss Nowlin, if you'll look at the very bottom one, that's the one I'm having trouble squaring with your testimony. If that refreshes your recollection or helps me understand.
Oh, so what this is talking about is it may be beneficial to make a qualitative statement about evidence to evidence comparisons. However, there is another section of our biology quality manual that specifically states if it's a probative comparison, a statistic must be provided. But what this is saying, okay, so for instance, if you're in one room in a scene and there's multiple swabs that are tested, we can say these are consistent or these appear to be from the same unknown individual.
How if say that?
I don't know. Now, if I'm going to say that these are from John Doe, I have to provide a statistic for each item and do a comparison of each item.
Did I hear you say you could compare if they're probative?
If it's, which that wouldn't be, in my mind, a probative comparison. We have multiple items of evidence in the same room in a scene. We can say that they appear to be consistent with the same unknown individual. That's not making any statement about who the individual might be. If I'm making a statement about who might be the source of that, then that is a probative comparison, and I need to provide a statistic.
Before you make the comparison where maybe you write exclusion, you don't know if it's excluded or included, though. Is that right?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah. Let me try and explain what I'm getting at. I'm not understanding why 95.9.1 couldn't have been manually looked at to do a manual comparison to the sheath DNA just to say excluded or not, when male E was compared to multiple items of evidence and it was excluded. But you don't know that until you do the comparison. Is that right?
Correct. So you can look at it manually, but if we're now making a probative statement, then we need to provide a statistic. And male E was also a single source, which is different than a mixture of DNA from multiple people.
All right. I don't think I have any other questions. Thank you. Maybe I could take those pages back from you.
Well, thank you, ma'am.
I hope she
Ms.
ripped them
Taylor,
out of her
you can call your
hands.
next witness.
Yeah. Matthew Gamit.
Oh, wait, swap out.
Okay, so Matthew Gamit,
Oh, whatever.
he's the one who doesn't have any cross. So,
Okay.
Ange, I don't know if you want to hang out still, or if you have.
You must.
I only respond to Mr. Gamut. Thank you very much.
Do you want to be Mr. Gamut? Because I know that he doesn't have any cross. So I don't know if you want to stay or not. I don't know what you want to do.
I am Mr. Gamut.
You want to be Mr. Gamut? Perfect.
Yeah, I am Mr. Gamut.
Do we have to hold for a paper or for a picture or whatever?
No, I'll just change my my name. Hold on. Well, actually, I'm not the host. What the fuck do I know?
Yeah, no, that's good.
I don't know if you have a picture of him or whatever.
I sent it to Ange.
Oh,
Sweet.
Okay, so Hella, you won't be Gamut.
Yep,
then.
that's cool.
You're good. Well, that's cool.
Oh my god, this guy's fun.
That's cute.
That's cute.
I need a break from Hella for a second if they're going to say anything about a knife sheath.
Well,
Every time, literally,
I mean,
I
the
was
knife
trying
sheath
not to
is
laugh.
very dangerous. You see,
Yeah, I could tell.
it's super
the knife.
dangerous, and
The
like,
knife
people
sheath.
have hurt
fucking-
themselves.
I've got a few questions, Teresa, that real brief that I can do at any time, but
Do it now because we're switching out Mr. Gamut.
okay, so we're at 84, page 84. Somebody remember that. So on page 7, the court's talking to the clerk, I guess, says, just to make sure we're not live, right, Sandra? So was that
It's for a
didn't-
remote witness.
they what?
I thought it was for I thought they were talking about the remote witness.
No, this is all off camera.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah. So there's no.
So
there's no
it was
camera
just
film.
audio feed, audio stream, I mean.
Public didn't get to hear.
No, we
any
didn't
of
have that
This
either.
is not. That's why we're doing this, because we never got to
Okay,
see or
gotcha.
hear any of it.
That's
Yeah.
that's what I thought. Then down at page, I can't read that 9.
Oh, maybe he was
Ms.
just
Taylor,
making
I'm
sure they
happy
weren't
to
live.
provide the court my copy or use of the Elmo to the court. This was the exchange between Ms. Taylor and the court, and he kind of wanted. There was 1,000 pages of exhibits, and she didn't provide a copy for him, and he was, a little snippy about. Well, I'm used to, at least having the pages that you're referring to so I can follow along. That's just kind of, I noted that it's kind of an example. You kind of want to know your judge and keep your judge happy. That's not an unusual or an unreasonable request for the court.
No.
You're all familiar with that. Some people follow along when they have something to look at visually. Some, it's more the auditory. Some it's a combination of both. But this is a more involved question. We can do it later. It's on page 30, and they're talking about the issues and where he sustains the objection. Well, we're going to do Franks, right? And then IGG, and then they're going, I understand we could get into the entirety of the Franks on IGG, which is why I allowed it. And that's what we're going to stick to today. She says, IGG flows. It makes everything. Court says, I'm not suggesting we get into other Franks issues that sprung in part from IGG because those are separate based, right? And so I think we need to just talk about the specific IGG stuff today in terms of Franks. I mean, I couldn't even follow this. There's not a separate motion to suppress based solely on that and not the IGG. If I am not mistaken, apart from Frank, Ms. Taylor, to suppress, which I'm not, and then even she says, I'm not following, I'm sorry. And it's her case. Court, there are motions to suppress that are not Franks related. Ms. Taylor, right, I'm not going there. And I think she means right now. And then court says that's evidence we can put on today, but I thought we were going to do that later today. Ms. Taylor, absolutely. So can one of y'all kind of explain what the issues were that kind of were delved into?
No, because we can't see the Franks memo, so we don't know like what he's talking about. Like I would assume, I mean, I can make assumptions, kind of like he did, that there were things like stemming from, like basically she was just trying to get into, before you did the IGG and you got his name, what did you know or not know, and what did you put in the affidavit? Like she did, in my opinion, she did kind of lean into Frank's stuff, because what she was kind of getting at was like,
Yeah, she
you hardly had
explained.
anything until after you got his name.
Right. She said, I'm just going to ask a couple more questions. I'm going to limit it to that. And the next question is going to be, did it expand after that point? And then he says, no, I'm going to sustain it. So she says, the court, there are various Franks motions, one of which is suppressed. One of the Franks motions is Frank's violation by not informing the magistrate of the use of IGG and violations, as you allege them, in obtaining the IGG. So part of the Franks is that they violated some law regulation.
They
Right.
used databases that
Right.
didn't allow officers to upload unknown
Right.
profiles and then create a tree from them.
Okay, then that's the issue we are doing today in terms of evidence, and I want to stick to that. So getting into the car, which is separate, which I understand your argument is the IGG led them to expand the search of the cars,
Yes.
but that's not the Franks issue itself. The Franks issue itself on IGG is the IGG itself. I don't even know what that means, and is limited to that. I think I know where he's going. And so she says, all right, he sustains the objection, and they move on. So, okay, I think I understand.
It's very difficult when they don't let you see, like they're trying to not say certain things for whatever reason. And so then it's difficult. Like he keeps referring to the Franks motion, but we can't read it.
Right. And, yeah, I'm more familiar with that, like saying essay and unalived, and
I don't say much of that. I say whatever
Thank
I
God.
want. They don't typically. YouTube for a while went where they were really strict about what was said, and that they would like take your monetization away. I think they got a lot of complaints on the free speech side of that, and so they ended up taking it away. But a lot of creators don't. They're still not comfortable with, you don't want to lose your channel, so they still stick with the unalive or the essay. Sometimes I say essay just because it's shorter, but yeah.
So I just had two more minutes of questions. You had a very interesting guest on yesterday in the afternoon. I was listening on the car and I really couldn't ask questions, but
Lana.
What was her name?
Her name is Lana from Truth and Transparency channel.
Okay. So, I mean, very detailed and keyed into the facts and whatnot. And then, and then, kind of her conclusions about how they interface with how the law of Franks works. And, but I'm wondering what, one of the questions I asked in chat, and I didn't really get an answer to from the other people in chat because it's really hard for me to see. But so we know there's a Franks motion, and we know there's other motions to suppress. So motions to suppress typically relate to search warrants, and you're suppressing evidence that was obtained.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think yesterday somebody in chat said one of the Franks motions, or the Franks motion, if there's more than one, related to the arrest warrant.
That would be a motion to suppress.
Okay. Well,
There's one of like the search warrants for his car, apartment, parents' house. Then there's one for the AT&T. There might be
okay.
2 AT&Ts.
What about his arrest? Just his arrest warrant?
Okay, so that has more to do with the Miranda, and when they think that he should have been read his Miranda rights. So going into like the custodial interrogation interview that we
Okay,
did with.
so they want to suppress his statement, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
But his statement, the argument there is that his statement only was him just rambling on. They didn't have to read him his Miranda because they weren't asking him any questions.
Okay. No, I just misunderstood yesterday that they were saying we're trying to suppress the arrest warrant, which you can do, but typically in states where or federal process where there's a grand jury, and the
So there wasn't.
the grand jury hears all of the evidence. They determine there's probable cause to proceed to trial, or if there's a preliminary hearing and they bind you over for trial, it resets, in other words. And so I was just trying to clarify that.
Right.
Go ahead.
So neither of those things happened. What happened was in Idaho, they got a warrant for his arrest in Idaho for the murders.
Right.
He was already in Pennsylvania. So what they
Right.
did was when they arrested him in Pennsylvania, they arrested him like as a fugitive because he had a warrant in Idaho. So I forget the specific charge in Pennsylvania. Like, let's say that it was a fugitive from justice and it was a state charge. They arrested him on that. And I don't think he even knew really about the murder stuff until they flew him back to Idaho. And then they were scheduled for a preliminary hearing. And right before the preliminary hearing is when they did the grand jury. And then he didn't get a preliminary hearing.
Okay. Gotcha.
So the arrest that they would be challenging is the one in Pennsylvania. Oh, here we go. Oh, wait, no, this is the order. So it's the motion to the motion to suppress arrest warrants. He already put orders out on a lot of these.
So Ange has to go. So Hella, I don't know if you want to go back to being Gamit. So a round of applause for Ange and all the great work she just did for us.
Thanks, Hella.
And then, yeah, and Hella, if you could be Gamit again. I'm going to be right back. I have to run to the restroom.
Okay.
And you got to run? Or did she already run?
Did you already leave? I can't see the screen.
Screens the transcript.
I see Nye. I see me. And you. Who's Hedwig?
Do not know. We're waiting for Teresa to get back. I had to leave early during that presentation yesterday. You were there for most of it?
No, I was working. I had to leave too. I still have to finish it.
Okay. But I could see her point on a number of things that they weren't spelling out maybe the entire reason. And that happens a lot of time when they're trying to protect or conceal an informant without even listing that they got information from a confidential informant. All of a sudden, things will take a shift and, why all of a sudden, are you focusing on him? And she indicated that there were, several things. The dates just aren't lining up, but I never ever got to hear what, she believed the rationale was behind it. You know what I mean? Like, why wouldn't they? And they're kind of touching on it here. Some of the points she was making, like, why didn't you, why did you all consciously leave? Was it IGG out of the? And I think that's obviously it's getting at. They didn't want to spill the beans that they were using an illegal database, right?
Correct.
And
which I always figured.
But that, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, because that's not going to invalidate a search warrant.
Well, they actually said that, like, in their, so the only one that they mentioned it was when they were searching in Washington, and they specifically put that they had done the IGG. They didn't get into details about it, like what databases they used or anything, but they mentioned that they used it, and then they specifically asked the judge not to consider the IGG for probable cause, just in case down the road something happens where the IGG is basically thrown out. Like, if it's not considered for probable cause, then they basically thought even if it did go away later on, it wouldn't matter because the probable cause was already determined without it.
Yeah, gotcha. Is T back? She's in chat.
I am. I'm back. I was just letting you guys talk. I didn't know if Hella ever said if she could be Gamit or not, so I wasn't sure if I should switch out or.
I didn't hear.
Hey, yeah, I can do it.
Okay, what page are we on in the transcript?
84.
Just a minute.
So while she's doing that, so Sleuthy had me look at some motions in Reed the other day. I think the Monday before last Tuesday, when there's all those fireworks, I'm reading them and I'm looking at the hearing, and then Judge Canoni had her meltdown and started breathing hard, and I'm going,
oh my God.
Boy, you sure sent me some good motions to look at. I'm like, it's obviously expanded. He didn't. Your question was, where's he going? The DA, where's he going with this stuff? And obviously he didn't lay it all out, but he tends to hide the ball and speak out of both sides of his mouth. Well, I'm not suggesting, I'm not being critical of other attorneys, Your Honor, but I'm critical of this.
He really does. He really does. Just like when he's talking about when they asked if what's his face, Betterow, when she was like, do you have any
opposition? And
and he's like, no, but I just want you to consider like these 50 things that I think you should consider when you oppose it.
Yeah.
Or I'm not opposing it though.
I've got no opposition, but I got some serious concerns.
Yeah. And then talk shit for like 10 minutes and then says, but I think she should have any attorney she wants. But also, that's all he does.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know who's worse, if it's like he and Lally both irritate me, but for two different reasons.
Yeah. So this is really cool that you got the transcript, and we'll start up again after this unless anybody else has anything, but that's really cool. You got it because people can see what they were trying to do in Delphi, what Richard Allen's attorneys were trying to do on the Franks, which was by omission. And it's very, very difficult to get by omission, but you can do it. But you got to have a hearing. And then Defense Diaries had something, a man that in Iowa that allegedly killed his wife on the farm. And,
corn rake killer.
Yeah, so that one they're actually doing, it's all on video, and so people can see, half the battle's getting the evidentiary hearing, which is what this transcript is from and what that Iowa thing is. And so this is really good that people get to see this, because you really don't normally see it. You just see the after effects, that it goes up and they deny the post-conviction writ or they grant it and you get a new trial. You don't get to see what is involved in making that happen. So I'm really glad you got this. Hopefully it wasn't as difficult as things have been for you in getting transcripts in Delphi. But
yeah. The court put this out all on their own. Nobody had to request it necessarily. They put it out all on their own. Yeah, like a good court should.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And and the earth didn't crumble, and
exactly.
And with respect to the families, we got 4 victims in this, right?
Correct.
And their families, and I dare to say, just what's been described so far, I mean, a very, very brutal scene, and yet we have pretty good access on the hearings other than this one. And I can understand wanting.
An FYI, he's the judge Hippler's already ruled on all of this, and he's denied everything that the defense brought forth. So all this is actually already ruled on now. But now, I mean, yesterday and today, there's just a ton of motions in limine and suppression stuff. I mean, there's tons of motions being dropped by both the state and the defense. So we haven't touched on any of that yet, because I wanted to finish up with what happened last week before we start on this week.
No, it's very, very important. I'm glad you did it. And I just wanted to point out, the earth hasn't ended by the fact that they're getting into facts and having a full hearing. And
something that I like is even things that are sealed, like initially, they periodically go over like past hearings like this one or motions that were previously sealed, and then if it's okay to do so or whatever, they go ahead and unseal it.
Right.
So it's not like it stays sealed forever.
Hippler is a very knowledgeable judge on law. But in this case in particular, I feel like I think he's already kind of determined that Brian's the guy. And it's almost so he does have not because he really likes one attorney better than the other, unlike Delphi. It's more like he just thinks he's the guy. So he's just like, yeah, no, that's just not enough to get rid of this, that, and the other. So,
I honestly don't think so. What I do think though is that he has a very set and probably higher standard for like arguments that are made. And so something that I noticed just between Anne and the other girl, I'm still sick. My brain is like mush.
Sorry, I missed what you said because I was laughing at Chelsea talking about nipples. Sorry, I was thrown off.
The dark-haired lady.
Oh, Eliza.
Eliza, yes. You could tell that she's used to arguing to him.
Yeah.
And I think that he's more inclined to go along with arguments that she makes. I almost just wonder if so think about it this way. You're arguing to a specific judge all the time, and their bar for legal argument is much lower. And then you go to somebody else who challenges you, like you feel like you're in an appellate court. Where like he's interrupting you and asking questions, asking you to clarify. Something that I noticed that he did in the last hearing that I watched with Anne was he kept trying to push her down a certain argument, and it felt like she wasn't picking up on what he was wanting her to say.
Yep.
In order to sort of get what she wants, but it could be that she recognized that if she did go down that way, that she was going to say something she didn't want to.
Yep.
Wow, that's
And
very
she looked
astute.
evasive.
But I don't know. I don't know if she's not argued in front of him, so she didn't pick up on it, or if she did pick up on it and just purposely kept sidestepping it
Yeah.
in order
Yeah.
to
And
not
she
say.
looked really evasive as a result. It didn't work.
I thought she did too.
I bet you're exactly right. I mean, both of you.
And they were
and
talking about this IgG stuff, so I just wonder, maybe
I
there'll be a
bet
hint in
you're
this stuff.
I bet you're exactly right. Y'all are pretty astute on that, and I bet if I could find that, I'd have no doubt I'd say I'd 100% concur. What happened with remember that big hearing about the expert who could come in and determine what the makeups of other counties in Idaho were for purposes?
Oh, yeah.
What happened with that?
Well, they
So
got their.
he allowed the expert to send out more
Okay,
questionnaires.
so that was Judge, and they
Yeah.
got a change of venue, and Judge is actually, I think he's retired or retiring. And then, so now we have Judge Hippler in Ada County. So they did get their change of venue based off of that witness they allowed to
I
come in.
didn't realize there's a new judge. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
And different county.
Sometimes you know, you gotta be careful what you ask for, right?
You
Right.
know, when I saw that immediately, so I remember I texted Bob, and I was like, I don't like this for them. I don't really like this for them, because they're not really going to get another judge. And I don't even mean that for like, I'm not trying to imply that like he leaned to defense even. I'm just saying in terms of hearing everything out, getting hearings all the time, letting them argue for hours on end.
Mhm.
You know, I was like, I said to Bob, I said, I guess Anne had to have weighed this, and the odds of getting a goal must have been worth it to not have this trial happen in Latah County.
It
Yeah,
couldn't
I'm
happen in
guessing
Latah
so
County.
because you know, the comparison at the time was, you know, a lot of people the comparison was Gull and him, and you know, just night and day, hearings on everything.
Yes.
But just one quick example was looking at a date, and of course the prosecution, they mentioned, well, no, we want it sooner. We were hoping in the fall.
Yeah.
And like October, November, and I of course have the dates messed up a little bit. And defense is like, we're looking at
Like
summer
next year.
at
Yeah.
the earliest, at the
Yeah.
very earliest, Judge. And you remember how Gull responded on, you know, scheduling and stuff at those first hearings in March, and oh, well, I had the so-and-so trial that took a week, and I had a I had
Oh,
a death
yeah.
penalty case, and I got a death penalty case done in 3 days, and I'm like, you know, that is shit you should not be proud of if you're a judge doing a death penalty case in 3 days, because it means very likely the defendant in that death penalty case didn't get good representation. There's no way you can represent somebody in a death penalty case, even if they plead guilty.
Right.
You know, you're not doing your job. So, but, you know, and he's like, okay, you know, everybody calm. And then the one thing in Idaho, I pointed it out at the time in Teresa's channel, that there's something different in Idaho that no other state has, that one of the considerations on scheduling and motions to continue is the court is supposed to factor in the wishes of the victims, the families. I don't know if y'all caught that. But the DA said, well, under Idaho Constitution, you have to consider the thoughts of the family, and no other state does that. But even despite all of that, I thought he's just a really good judge. I didn't think he was.
You talk about John Judge.
Go ahead.
John Judge. Oh my gosh.
Judge John Judge.
Yes, Judge. All right, I don't mean to interrupt, but I want to keep going because we're not even.
No, I was going to suggest we're all ready. So here we go. Everybody ready?
Yep.
Ms. Taylor, I believe you had Mr. Gamit, is it, coming up? You may proceed.
Gamit.
Dag nabbit.
Good morning.
Oh, I'm gonna try and do an American accent. Good morning.
Oh Close. Will you please state your name?
Yes, my name is Miss Matthew Gamit.
Is this what we sound like to you?
Yeah. Yeah, this is it.
Oh my gosh.
MATTHEWGAMMETTE.
How are you employed?
I'm with Idaho State Police Forensic Services. I'm a laboratory system director.
Oh, now I know that's not American. That's not English.
What if she started out? She's going to be like that meme where it's like, my name is Jeff.
I don't know. It's really hard.
What does that mean to be the laboratory system director?
I oversee operations of the laboratory system. I oversee anything from purchasing, procurement, contracts, human resources type issues, and hiring, terminations. I also oversee things like just how the laboratory operates day to day.
How long have you held that role?
I've been with the Idaho State Police Forensic Services for just about 16 years, and I believe I've held this current role for about 10.
Do you have prior experience in a similar line of work?
I do. Prior to working for Idaho State Police, I worked for Washington State Patrol as a DNA analysis, and also a crime scene responder.
How were you educated?
I have a bachelor's degree from Brigham Young University. I also have a master's degree from Brigham Young University. And then I have continuing certificates from both West Virginia University and UC Davis.
Are you involved in the collaborative group NTVIC?
I am.
NTVIC? Is it NTVIC?
I don't know.
What is that group?
So that is the National Technology Implementation Collaborative. So currently, my role is to chair that group.
As it relates to forensic, investigative, genetic genealogy, what's the group's role with that field?
So currently, what we're working on, we have several different subcommittees in our forensic, investigative, genetic genealogy group. What that group is focused on is anything from policies, procedures, contracts, things of that nature, looking at the implementation of that technology into public forensic science laboratories.
Why is that important?
Why is the work of the group important?
Let me ask the question better. Why is it important to have policies and procedures?
In any public forensic science laboratory, we want to make sure we implement technology well, that we implement it in a robust way, that it can be relied upon for things such as courts. And so we always want to make sure that when we're implementing a technology, that we take a look at how that technology is being used and that we apply it well in the public laboratory space.
Is that important for public trust?
I believe so. Yep.
Are there other organizations that you're involved in the course of your work?
Yes. I'm involved with several other forensic science organizations.
How about ASCLD?
Yes, sorry, Bob.
Damn ass lid.
What is that one?
ASCLD, the American Society of Crime Lab Directors.
What is the purpose of that group?
So that's the group of laboratory directors. It could be laboratory managers, quality managers, laboratory leaders. In essence, members of that organization.
What is your role with that group?
Currently, I report to the board of directors at the CFESO, the Consultorium of Forensic Science Organizations liaison for the Organization for ASCLD.
Did you have a role in deciding that Othram Labs should contract with Idaho State Police Forensic Labs?
I did have a role, yes, ma'am.
What was your role?
My role would be as a laboratory system director, making a decision on contracts that would be awarded.
Did you decide that Othram should receive the contract?
I did not.
Did you work on the contract with Othram?
I need to answer that question in a little bit different way than you asked it. If you'll give me some leeway,
Sure.
I did not work specifically on the contract with Othram. However, I worked on the specifications that led to a contract being awarded to Othram.
The specifications you worked on, did those end up becoming part of the contract with Othram?
Yes.
What were those specifications?
So, there were specifications within the scope of work that we developed to send out for a general bid process. As we bid as a state agency, as we bid for a contract, we send out specifications that anyone has to comply with as they give us their documents and responses back on those things. Then we have the ability to look at and make sure that they are compliant with those specifications that we sent out.
What were the specifications for Othram?
There were lots of specifications sent out on the request for proposals, intent to bid. There were a lot of different specifications that were sent out. Again, I have a recollection of some of them. I don't have a full memory of all of them.
Will you share with us what you do recall?
So, things in that contract would specify that they use the interim policy. We also would put things in there about their following environmental protection provisions the federal government require us to abide by. It also would have other things like reporting requirements back to us, billing procedures, a lot of different conditions we put in that to specify how they're going to work with us.
When you say interim policy, are you referring to the Department of Justice interim policy?
Oh, yes.
Did you care if they were an accredited lab?
So, at this time, as we were looking for a forensic investigative genetic genealogy vendor or company to provide these services for us, we were not aware of any companies at this time that were accredited.
Since that time, though, are you aware that companies do become accredited?
Absolutely. Currently, there are definitely companies that are accredited in these services. At this time that this contract was bid, there were none to my knowledge.
Did you look at the procedures and protocols of Othram before you decided?
So I don't recall specifically myself reviewing those criteria. I know that there were manuals, protocols that were provided back to us as part of the bid. Generally, I would provide those to others within our laboratory that were more qualified than I was at that specific technology, and I'm not qualified in fig analysis.
Do you recall if their instruments were validated?
I do not recall.
Would that be important to have their instruments validated?
Validation is up to each laboratory and how they accomplish that. I can't speak to the working practices of ITHRAM laboratories.
Does Idaho State Police Forensics Lab validate their equipment?
Yes, we do.
Is that important to do?
To us as an accredited laboratory, yes, that's the important part.
How about retention of data or the ability to go back and rebuild the work or look at the work that was done?
So we retain, in our cases, we retain our electronic data. We retain any other notes and things that we make as part of our case records, part of our case file. We provide those to the investigators and to the court as a normal business practice.
Did Othram do that?
In this case, I believe they gave us a report or what was identified as a preliminary report. The contract specified that they could keep any data or other things associated with that. For our purposes, we were most concerned that that data or anything else not be released to any other parties. And so our concern was more about data security, data privacy. And so in this case, I don't know if they have any other data or other records that they have kept, that they've retained. We have asked them as part of the termination, in this case, of our work, that they would preserve those things, or they that would communicate with both the prosecutor's office and with Moscow Police Department if any of that information was to be disposed or whatnot.
Okay. Keep it or tell somebody before you get rid of it. Am I understanding that?
Our specification was that it stopped our process with them, that we're no longer in a contractual obligation with them on this case. Essentially,
Teresa?
we were transferring ownership of anything on this case between them and Moscow Police Department and the prosecutor's office.
The report that you ended up receiving from them, are you aware that that report doesn't provide details of how they did their work?
I've seen the report, yes. I've seen what was in the report.
Would you agree that what's in the report is far different than what the Idaho State Police Forensics Lab produces by way of notes and photographs in connection with its work?
We were not provided with analytical notes. We were not provided with data, to my knowledge. We were provided with what was identified to me as a preliminary report, which contained some of their genealogical work on the case and other things such as potential nationalities.
Is that different than what you produce when you produce a report at your lab?
Look, it's hard for me to answer that question because it's a different report. It's a different type of analysis, and so I can't make a qualification there. I can tell you in our DNA reports, we release the report, we release the analyst notes. As a general practice, we have the electronic data and other things available for disclosure, but that's our general practice. I can't speak to the processes Othram Labs and what they disclose, nor can I speak to what is normal for a release in a FIG case.
Are you familiar with how you come up with a SNP? With that process where you get from a DNA sample to a SNP?
In general, yes, but I'm not qualified in FIG analysis.
Okay, I won't go too far with that. Are you familiar with how you get from a DNA sample to an STR sample for the lab's purposes?
Yes.
Are there similarities between the two processes from getting pieces of DNA to an end result profile that you can use.
Similarities in process as far as extraction and quantitation of DNA, but as far as instrumentation use, methods, and those kinds of things, very different processes. I sound Irish now.
Yeah, a little bit. So some of the documents that Idaho State Police Forensics Lab produces that show us those results, those would be similar to what you would expect to see with a SNP.
Mm, I would assume, again, it's not qualified in FIG analysis, so I can't speak to what documents they may or may not produce.
Let's move from there. Thank you for that. And let's talk about Othram being involved in the case that winds up being why we're here today. What communication did you have with Othram on the early end of that process?
So it's my recollection our early communication on this case was providing them with DNA. They would be able to develop, hopefully, an investigative lead for us on the case. After that sample, to my knowledge, had been that we had followed our processes through and that we had put a sample into CODIS, that we had not received any hits of CODIS, and then we would proceed with the next step of testing. We did have a contractual relationship with them since early in, I believe, 2021. And so we did have a contract with them in place.
Was this the first case that Othram produced or that Othram worked pursuant to that contract?
No, I don't. Hang on. No, I don't believe so. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Whoopsie.
And Taylor left the courtroom.
Did you say you didn't believe so?
I don't believe so.
How'd they get the DNA?
The DNA sample itself? That DNA sample was delivered by Moscow Police Department in person to them at Othram Labs.
Did you have any role in that part?
I did.
What did you do?
I accompanied the officer from Boise down to Houston and down to the Othram laboratory. I didn't have possession of the sample, but I was with the investigator that did it.
After that sample was delivered, did you have communications with Othram further?
Yes.
What were those?
So I had communications, to my memory, with them about what type of analysis we were asking them to do. Also, what type of searching. I remember they asked specifically for consent to do certain types of searching. We had to authorize things through memos and whatnot of them doing certain searching. Specifically, I believe it was family tree DNA that they needed an authorization for. I remember having significant discussion with them about YSTR testing and if or how that would be accomplished.
Why did you want Othram to do YSTR testing?
So, the reason for YSTR testing is to utilize different investigative databases that might be out there. I don't believe in this case we ever did YSTR testing. A lot of the discussion was around preservation of the sample, or as much of the sample we could preserve. And so our recommendation to them was to not proceed with that type of testing at this time, to kind of see where we were able to go with the traditional SMP testing with the whole genome sequencing. And then we would maybe potentially revisit YSTR testing. I do remember some discussion with David Mittelman at Othram about it, if they were able to bootstrap some of the whole genome sequencing in order to develop a Y profile that could be searchable from the data that they already developed instead of using additional sample to specifically develop a YSDR profile or any kind of Y profile.
What does that mean, bootstrapping? Take me back. They have this DNA sample, and then have they done those steps to get to their SNP before you want bootstrapping done, or At what stage are you talking about?
Essentially, it was our understanding that they were in the process of or already had obtained a whole genome sequencing profile, and so our question to them was, is there a way to develop a YSDR profile from the genetic information that you already have through the other method of testing?
And that's what you mean by bootstrap? Add a different kind of analysis?
Correct.
Why would you want to do that?
Again, to see if there was a potential to search Y databases that might be available out there to identify genetic lineages.
What does that mean, genetic lineages?
So a Y chromosome is passed down from a father to son, and so we would be looking to see if we can identify a family line through tracking the Y chromosome DNA from father to son, to grandfather, all the way down to grandson, and potentially over multiple generations. So it would tie us into a family line that could be investigated further.
Did Othram bootstrap and get the YSTR for you?
To my knowledge, they never did anything with YSTR testing, and to my recollection, with my discussions with David, that wasn't possible with the data that they had at that point.
It was impossible?
That it was not possible, correct.
Thank you.
I do not believe that was attempted. Again, I'm not familiar with the technology that he would have had to have used to do such a thing, so I'm not aware if that was possible. If the technology didn't exist, I just don't know.
Okay, at some point, did Othram talk to you about the work they were doing?
Yes,
And did they have a recommendation?
they did. They had at least one recommendation that I can remember.
When was that conversation?
I don't remember exactly when that conversation happened.
Well, let's put it between. Well, when did they get the DNA to start with?
So they got the DNA November 22nd, I believe.
And when were they notified to stop work?
I believe the official notification was December 10th, if I remember correctly.
So when they came back to you with some recommendations, where was that in relation to the stop work?
Probably early in December. I'm guessing the actual work in the laboratory, what I would call the wet work, in the laboratory, would be the first couple of weeks, probably, before they would have turned it over to a genealogist to be searching in the databases and those sorts of things.
To make sure I'm with you, wet work means DNA sample to where we get to the whole genome sequencing and then where we get to a SNP. I know I'm skipping steps, but that's the wet work.
Correct, the laboratory work. So anything that would be done in the physical laboratory. Handling the sample, putting it into tubes, adding liquids, things of that nature that would be done in the laboratory. Sequencing on an instrument, that would all be done in the first week, several weeks.
So after that, they have a recommendation for you?
Correct.
What's their recommendation to you?
Their recommendation, to my memory, to my recall, was that they had several individuals that had the potential to be of interest in this investigation. They asked us if, to further their family tree building, if we could be in contact with individuals and see if they were willing to contribute information into the databases that we're using in order to further the family tree building and further the geological work.
And we're in a closed setting here, so I'm going to ask you to give me the last name.
I don't recall the last name. I'm sorry.
Was it your understanding that these were 4 brothers?
Yes.
Okay. What did you do in relationship to these 4 brothers?
So we did some cursory work, just looked into the publicly accessible information, literally Google searches and things of that nature. What our approach was is we didn't want to be approaching people, especially with an investigation of this nature, that really had nothing to do with anything. We just wanted to make sure there was some reason why Ostrom Laboratories was asking us to go and asked these individuals to put their DNA into the database that law enforcement can search. So we just did some work to build just very cursory family trees to see what connection these individuals might have, and to verify these individuals were indeed brothers, things of that nature.
Did you verify they were 4 brothers?
I don't know that we would use the word verify, but we believe that the information was reliable, that they had given us based on the publicly accessible information.
Now, I know you said you can't remember the last name of those brothers. We're here today, and Brian Koberger's name has been on the news for 2 years. You know his name. That wasn't the last name.
That was not the last name.
After you did the cursory work and the family tree, what was the next thing you did in relation to these 4 brothers?
We, at some point, I don't remember exactly when, we asked our investigator, Detective
God.
Vicky Gooch,
Oh, God.
with
Oh,
the
God.
Idaho State Police, to reach out to one of the brothers who we believe had put information into a genealogical database. Ask him if he would be willing to upload that into one of these databases so they could further build out and use the information. That information. She was, I believe, initially able to contact that individual. He was skeptical about her contact, and so there was another contact, a 3-way call made between myself, Vicky, and this individual for purposes of trying to validate this was indeed a law enforcement investigation. This was indeed a legitimate request. And at that point, that individual requested not to be contacted again. Smart. Was not
Very
interested in
smart.
participating. Yeah.
Disagree.
During the time leading up to that phone call when you were building your family tree, I know none of the 4 brothers had the last name Koberger. That name didn't come up when you were building the family tree either, did it?
No.
After that brother said, "Don't contact me again," what was the next thing you did?
So I remember again exactly when the time frame was with that. But I know that there were active discussions about having a phone call with the agency and the prosecutor's office about the work that was being done. They were requesting updates from us of what is the Ostrom laboratory doing, where are you at in the investigation, those types of things. We were giving them updates via telephone, via telephonic conferences with them, just giving them updates on we've delivered the sample, we've done this, those sorts of updates. And then they requested a meeting with us to talk about the testing.
These conferences, who participated in those?
Most of the time, to my memory, it was usually Idaho State Police detectives. The prosecutor's office might also have been privy to some of those discussions. Again, just general updates about where we were in the process.
Tell me about this meeting. It sounds like there's a big meeting that happens.
Oh, there was a meeting, to my knowledge, and I don't remember exactly when, but probably the morning of December 10th, when we had a meeting, telephonic meeting is my memory, with representatives from Moscow Police Department. I believe FBI had representatives on the phone call, ISP, I believe myself, I think I was there, ISP legal counsel, and I believe that the colonel of state police was also on the phone call.
What happened on that phone call?
In that phone call, we were asked to turn over any kind of investigative records that we had, any kind of information that we had, to the FBI team. They provided me with an email address to be able to provide what they were requesting from us, which was, to my memory, if it was to the login information essentially, and it might have been other things I'm not aware of, like packets and things. I'm not aware of the technical terms, but basically, they were asking us to provide that information to the FBI investigator.
Did you do that?
Yes.
Do you know what you provided to the FBI investigator?
So, what we asked for to be provided were the 2 database searches of information so that they could be independently searched. And we also asked them to cooperate and provide any information that they needed to be able to further investigate.
When you say two databases, do you mean the two genetic genealogy databases that allow law enforcement to search?
Yes, to my knowledge, these samples were searched in two genealogical databases that allow searching by law enforcement. So GED match and family tree DNA, I believe, were the two that were searched, and we were asked to provide those credentials, that information to the FBI.
Do you know that GEDmatch has two different databases, GEDmatch and GEDmatch Pro?
Yes,
Is it because one of those allows law enforcement and the other doesn't?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. Idaho State Police Forensics Lab's direction to Othram was to look only in the databases that allow law enforcement search. Is that right?
Our direction to them was to follow the interim policy per contract with them, and any other communications we would have had with them would be to follow the interim policy.
Does that mean yes? You expected them to only search the allowed databases?
I believe that that is what would have been communicated. That's our understanding of what that interim policy means, is they would search those databases that was allowable to be searched by us as a law enforcement entity.
After Othram turns over whatever they turn over to the FBI and you get the report and they get paid, is that the end of it with Othram for this case?
So they provided to us a report after we had asked them to turn over all of the information to the investigating agency and to the FBI. They provided us with what was identified as a preliminary report. I believe they titled it that because it was not a final report. The testing, we had asked them to terminate the testing, but they were not at a final result of a name to provide to us, an investigative lead to provide to us.
Why was the decision made for the FBI to take this over and not let Othram finish?
Oh, I don't know. I can't speak to that.
In that meeting, there was nothing stated about why we're going to do this?
I don't recall specific reasons, but they had asked us to transfer everything to the FBI.
Okay, did you take a look at the two profiles, the FBI's SNP profile and Othram's SNP profile? Have you looked at those?
Did we look at those, or did I look at those?
Did you?
I did not know.
Have you seen them?
No.
Would it surprise you to know the FBI profile was over twice as big as Othram's?
Again, I have no knowledge of what the FBI did or didn't do. I have no knowledge. Yeah.
How involved were you with the FBI's process of their genetic genealogy?
I was not involved, other than to provide the samples to where they asked us to send those samples to. And then from that point, I was not involved in the process.
Have you become aware that they searched databases that are not allowed to be searched by law enforcement?
Pure speculation is all I know, but I have no first-hand knowledge of anything.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks for that. Your Honor, if I can have just a moment, I have a couple of questions for you about some documentation.
Sure.
The document that gave recommendations for you to call someone or to call some of the four brothers, where is that?
So I believe that was provided to us telephonically. I don't think there was like an official report. I don't think there was an email. I think it was names provided telephonically. And then those names were actually provided as part of that report that came several days after the conclusion of testing.
Okay, so you recognized those names from that report?
Yes, those have been provided to us before.
The work that you were doing before trying to call one of the brothers, where did you keep your documents for that?
As far as the records that. I'm sorry, I'm confused on the question.
Let me ask it better. You did some work, research work, before you and Detective Gooch made the phone call to one of the brothers and kind of built out a family tree and did some other research. Where did you keep that?
Those were paper copies, and those were retained and then sent to Othram as part of us communicating back to them, basically saying this is the work we did. We're providing these back to you in case they're helpful as you continue to build out the family trees.
Do you still have a copy of those?
Yes,
Did you document your attempt to get a voluntary sample from one of the brothers?
I do believe so.
Do you know if Detective Gooch wrote a police report about that?
I do not know.
Did she provide any of her notes to you? Her investigative notes?
Not to me. I don't know if she kept notes.
Okay. Did you watch her write anything down?
I did not. We were telephonic, I believe, at that point.
It would be hard to see then. Have you seen any documentation from that December 10th meeting?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Any documentation that's come your way from the FBI's work?
Not to my knowledge.
Have you turned over your work with the genetic genealogy, the help you were giving Othram? Have you turned that over to the prosecutor?
I have not turned over physical copies of anything. I believe that our agency complied with the discovery request. I don't know exactly what was provided as part of that discovery request. Certainly it is in the email document from me to Othram Laboratories, and as such, I would assume that would have gone as part of the discovery request.
Are you talking about the discovery request that the defense made?
I'm not exactly sure. We were just asked to comply. We know that at any point our emails are discoverable, and I believe the way that ISP handles discovery requests, large discovery requests especially, is to do a, quote, email pull of anything that might be related to the case.
I think that the area that I'm concerned about, and I do have a lot of emails, so thank you for that. The procedures and protocols from Othram that you know about, that you've read, where are they?
So those protocols would have been back in 2021, I believe, from when we initially did the RFP. I believe it's the RFP process. I'm not completely familiar. It might be an intent to bid. I'm not sure what to call the process. Regardless, when that process was going through, they would have provided those documents to us at that point, and I believe those documents likely exist.
Okay, any of the work that Othram did in getting from DNA sample all the way down to SNP profile, where are they?
Where is the documentation of that? I do not have that documentation. That was not provided to us, to my knowledge. I don't know everything that was provided back to the laboratory potentially, but to my knowledge, we were not provided with that information.
Would Othram have it?
Potentially, I don't know.
The work that they did to come up with a name to give to you for further investigation, where are those documents?
I don't know.
And your documents, some went to Othram, but you still have a copy of those?
I do.
I think that's it. Thank you very much. That's all from me for now.
Mr. Nye, cross-exam.
No questions, Your Honor.
Okay, so I hate to do this to you guys, but I have to pick up a kid from gymnastics. I really wanted to try to finish this in one go, but it's late for Sleuthy. I don't even know what time it is for Hella.
It's 2 days from now.
Yeah, I know.
It's 2 p.m. next Saturday.
I can't even keep up. I think she's like in March already, so I don't know what's going on. But there's a couple things I want to talk about real quick, just so far in the transcript. And I know more information comes out because I kind of peeked through the transcript. I mean, I haven't done a full read, but I know more information comes out. But so far, she's kind of hammering in on the fact that Othram used these places that law enforcement isn't allowed to use. But they are allowed to use GEDmatch Pro, and they are allowed to use family tree DNA. So I think that where she's heading with that is probably later. But for me, these two witnesses, the last one and this one, are really not the right witnesses for her to be trying to push the IGG. They don't have any of the info. They're like preliminary witnesses. Like, okay, so you guys did the original DNA. You followed him down to Othram Labs to make sure that it was delivered. And that's really all these two are good for. I don't see why they're important.
This last one, though, was involved in the RFP to get them as a vendor, and yet there's, where are the documents they sent you? And, I may have them. Yeah. It's just real loose, and things are frequently like that. But I just thought for the person that was involved in the process of, obtaining genetic testing, that,
especially at all the
lab director was pretty weak.
Yeah.
This is why the new lawyer Bicaballo is going to be useful. I think they need somebody who can ask better questions. Not that she's not doing the best she can, but I feel like she's floundering a little bit with these people.
They kind of need to have somebody who knows in more particular terms the interim policy.
Yes, that.
Since that's the only thing they have to go off of, everybody.
Yep.
All right, there's 2 more witnesses. We made it over halfway, so I mean, we did a good job. I'm not going to say we didn't do a good job, and you guys have been great. So for me, I just, IGG is like one of my favorite things in the whole world. And I know like not everybody agrees, and there's a bunch of people in chat that are and Sleuthy, who's like, and I think Hella too is like, yeah, good job not helping them. I'm a firm believer in the IGG, especially the forensic IGG.
I love it.
I'm in the minority of people who think that it should be used in cases like this to get them solved quickly so other people aren't killed. But most people don't think that. I do believe that there needs to be some precedents set and some very clear guidelines on how IGG is used in criminal cases like this, which for me is the bigger conundrum of most states do not have anything in place on how and when IGG can be used, and then where it can come into play in the court.
Right.
And so I do struggle with that. But I
felt
think
like this was kind of an inappropriate time to like try it out. You know what I mean? Like
too
a
big of a
quadruple
case.
homicide.
Well, I feel like they well, even though they tried to tell the public it was like a targeted attack and whatnot, I think they knew that they had a potential really bad killer out there on the loose that they could not just let continue to go wherever the hell they wanted to go. You know what I mean? Like, I think that he would have continued to kill again if he didn't feel the pressure that they were on to him.
Why do you? I still wonder how they determined right away that it was targeted. And wouldn't you think that targeted 2 survivors that didn't even get hurt or confronted in any way? Wouldn't you think that it would be somebody that would have known the people that did die versus a stranger? And then how do you go about figuring out whose DNA belongs there? Like the whole explanation for CODIS, I'm going to have to like look into that some more. I don't think that that's even a thing, that if they were to submit another one, then they would have to like
No,
remove
that's
the first
absolutely
one.
not a thing. You don't even have to look into it. I'll tell you right now, that is not a thing. You can submit as many samples. You can't take. So if I took one swab of the DNA from the sheath and I came up with one profile, I can't submit that profile over and over again. Like, I can't continue to take the same piece of evidence and submit it. If I have multiple samples, I can absolutely submit them. Unless I have clear and convincing evidence that DNA belongs to somebody who is supposed to be there. Like if it was Kaylee's or Maddie's, you know what I mean? Like I'm not going to submit that to CODIS, but all the unknown, I don't know why we're pretending like we can't submit it. I mean, that's like the stupidest thing, that they put this fucking Payne guy as a lead investigator in the case, and he thinks you can only submit one sample to CODIS at a time. Otherwise, it takes out your prior one.
Yeah,
That's ridiculous.
That goes to show you, like, it's still a big question for me. Who determined that he should be the lead, and how they came about coming to that determination? Because he was a nobody. Like he was. I know that everybody has to like start somewhere or whatever, but not at a quadruple murder for your first ever murder.
But it's Moscow. Like, there's no one really there, right?
So let's see,
one
police
huge
have
thing in this was one sample they excluded, but another sample they didn't exclude. That particular witness, I think it was the one prior to this one, said, well, one was a mixture, one was a single source. But so did that answer it for you guys, or is
No,
there
because
still
that's the one
questions
from the
why they didn't hone in on this other sample like they did with that sample that they did all that work on?
No, so the sample that was mixed is from the trash at his parents' house.
but the blood that they found on the railing between the first floor and the second floor with no victims, second floor with 2 victims and 1 non-victim. I'm going to need to know whose blood that is.
Yeah.
Because
Why not?
it's not a victim's blood, right? And
No.
it's
Why
not
can we not
Brian
know that?
Koberger's blood. And so somebody got cut.
Yeah. Like, I just don't see an explanation for not knowing who that blood is.
I said this when I was on with Lana yesterday, and a couple people in chat remembered what I was talking about. But I'm almost positive that they talk about this other unknown sample. And Bill Tom, I'd have to go back in like old notes when I used to cover this case religiously.
It wasn't
Bill
eligible.
Thompson said it wasn't enough to put into anything. I just, in my brain, I remember it, but I can't tell you where, when, or why I think that. But there was a few people in chat yesterday that remembered what I was talking about. I can't source it if you make me
Not
source
enough
it.
physically, you mean?
I don't
Like, not enough
remember-
to actually pick up?
I don't remember him saying that, but I do remember him saying in a hearing, like I can picture his face saying it, that it was not eligible to be entered
Right.
in
The
CODIS.
criteria. What's the criteria?
Like, I don't think
Well,
it had
they just told us the criteria of what not this guy, the other lady.
Yeah.
She told us what things can't be put into CODIS. So I'm assuming it would have met one of those things.
But what about IGG? CODIS gone, but what about putting it in the same way they found Brian, though?
I agree with you in the sense that I would have sent them all for priority. If anything, I would have chose, like, there were other ones, but I would have picked the blood in the hallway,
Yeah,
and I would have picked the blood from the glove outside.
absolutely. And what about the 2 unidentified profiles on the sheath as well?
Yeah, I always said that depending on what the other unknown male DNAs were from. So, for
Yeah.
instance, would touch DNA on the doorknob of one of the surviving roommates' bedrooms mean a whole lot to me? Not really.
No.
But would somebody's blood, on the sheets where the victims are,
Yep.
would it mean more to me than touch DNA on a sheath? It would, to me.
If we're going to pay attention to a couple of skin cells on a sheath, then we're going to pay attention to some blood. Definitely. Right. You can't just pick and choose. You can't be like, well, that one matters, but that doesn't.
See, Mandy says
Well, they got Tara made the comment that a lot of this is going to be chain of custody, and yeah, that's true to a great extent. But they got a lot of good stuff for cross-examination. The defense did, which is frequently with all that you end up with after a Franks hearing. They're rarely granted. They're just so difficult, and police have gotten smart. They're not going to just flagrantly lie because there's too many ways to check them. But they'll leave things out by omission. But they've got a lot of good stuff to show kind of some sloppiness in the way this was done. I don't know how much the court or if there's been any motions yet on how this was kind of, you know, a nefarious plan to use particular databases, because some were open to LE, others were closed off to LE.
Right.
That whole thing, I don't know if court's gonna, but you know, I assume that's going to get into evidence. Do we know if the genetic familial testing's coming in yet or not, or has there been?
They're not.
motion?
So that's part of what this whole thing is, that she wanted the IgG and everything that was found after it essentially out, and he denied that. So everything is in, but prosecutors have already stated they're not actually going to use any of the IgG stuff at trial. That's not, they've never even planned on using
They
it.
never wanted to.
Right.
Yeah.
They consider it like the FBI said, hey, here's a tip, go check out this guy. And then so they went and investigated the guy. But I don't know if you guys are available tomorrow, or if we can come up, if, you know, I want to try to finish this, but there's no way I can right now. I have to leave in like 2 minutes. So
yeah, no, tomorrow's good for me if that's what you end up doing. I'll look for updates. I had a
What
good
time
time.
is
Thanks for
starting?
having me. And
whatever time works for you guys, because like I said, I was hoping to get it done, but we have 2 witnesses, and Leah Larkin is one of the last ones, and she's a very big name in investigative genetic genealogy. And then we have we'll have more time to kind of talk through it, because we'll be mostly, you know, we're already most of the way through the transcript, so we can actually have more conversation about it.
Yeah, I've just got to be gone by about an hour before this. That's all.
Okay.
So I can be there for the first bit.
Sleuthy, what you got?
I should be good.
Okay.
I can be there for the first half.
All right, I'll message all of you guys then in the morning, and then try to set it up for tomorrow night. We can do a part 2, and then we'll have more time to kind of talk through what we find out from that part.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you guys, and Ange, I know you're not here anymore, but thank you too.
Ange was great.
I know she did a good
How
job.
good was Ange?
How good were you? What are you talking about?
I can't. Well, I feel stupid doing my Australian accent because, like, none of these people are Australians.
I still love your Australian accent. You can do it anytime.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I love you guys. Thank you so very much, and all of you guys in chat. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. You know, like I said, we'll do a part 2 tomorrow. I'm gonna do my best tomorrow day to try to do a live on some of the new motions, and then tomorrow night we'll do the read through of the rest of the transcript. That's kind of my goal right now. We'll see how it plays out. But thank you guys for hanging out with us. I love you guys as always. I know you guys have 1,000 other places you could spend your time, and you choose
out of most of those.
you spend your time here with us.
Cool.
Love you.
See
Bye.
tomorrow.
Love you. Bye.
Bye.